The sound of flesh striking flesh is something you never forget, especially when it is the hand of a man hitting the face of your only daughter. The slap echoed through the dining room, silencing the chatter of 50 wealthy guests. My daughter Maya stood there, trembling, her hand covering her cheek, while her husband Preston glared at her with pure, unadulterated malice. But the horror did not stop there. From the head of the table, Preston's mother Victoria clapped her hands. She actually clapped. "Good for you, son," she chirped as if he had just won a trophy. "Put her in her place." In that moment, I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I simply stood up, adjusted my cheap suit jacket, and walked out to the balcony. While they laughed inside, thinking I was a coward running away, I pulled out my old flip phone and made one call. They thought they were the kings of the world, but they had no idea that the man they called a truck driver was about to bring their entire kingdom crashing down. Before I tell you how I destroyed my son-in-law's life in less than 5 minutes, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that no man has the right to lay a hand on a woman. My name is Elijah Bennett, but back in Detroit, everyone just called me Eli. I am 73 years old, and if you saw me walking down the street, you would not look twice. I wear cardigans I bought at a thrift store, and I drive a 10-year-old Ford sedan that smells like peppermint and old leather. To the world, I am just a retired truck driver living on a pension, spending my days reading newspapers and feeding pigeons. To my son-in-law, Preston, and his mother, Victoria, I am something even less. I am an embarrassment, a stain on their pristine white tablecloth. They tolerate me only because Maya insists on it. But there is a lot that Preston does not know about me. He sees the calluses on my hands and thinks they come from steering wheels. He does not know those calluses came from gripping the throat of the logistics industry for 40 years. He does not know that before I retired, I controlled the shipping routes for the entire Midwest. He does not know that the venture capital fund that keeps his failing tech company afloat is owned by a holding company that operates out of my basement. I stayed in the shadows to keep my children safe. I wanted Maya to be loved for who she was, not for her father's money. But looking at her tonight, standing in the middle of this shark tank, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. I had let the sharks think the water was safe. It was the 5th anniversary of Sterling Technologies' Preston S. Company. The party was held at their estate, a sprawling glass and steel monstrosity in the hills that I knew they could barely afford. The air conditioning was set too cold, and the room smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. I sat at the far end of the long dining table nursing a glass of water. I did not fit in. I was the only black face in a sea of white privilege, and Victoria had made sure to seat me next to the kitchen door where the servers came in and out. Preston was drunk. He had been drinking since noon, fueled by the stress of a failing quarter and the arrogance of a man who has never been told no. He was holding court at the center of the room, loudly recounting stories where he was always the hero. Maya was trying to be the perfect hostess. She looked thin, too thin. Her smile did not reach her eyes. She was moving around the table, pouring wine for the investors Preston was trying to impress. It happened in slow motion. Maya reached over to refill the glass of a man named Mr. Henderson, a banker Preston owed money to. Her hand shook just a little. A few drops of red wine splashed onto the white tablecloth. It was a tiny stain no bigger than a dime. The room went quiet. Preston stopped talking. He looked at the stain, then he looked at Maya. His face twisted into a mask of disgust that made my blood run cold. "You clumsy idiot," Preston sneered. His voice was not loud, but it carried across the room like a whip. "That is Italian linen. Do you have any idea how much that costs? Or is your brain too small to understand the value of things?" Maya went pale. "I am sorry, Preston," she whispered, grabbing a napkin. "I will clean it up." "Leave it," he barked, slamming his hand on the table. "You will just make it worse. God, why can you not do anything right? I ask you to do one simple thing. Pour the wine, and you ruin it." I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. I placed my hands flat on the table to keep them from forming fists. Victoria, who was sitting to Preston's right, took a sip of her champagne and sighed loudly. "Honestly, Maya," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, "you cannot blame him for being upset. He works so hard to provide this life for you, and you cannot even handle the basics of etiquette, but I suppose we cannot expect too much considering where you come from." She cast a sideways glance at me, a microaggression sharp as a needle. Preston laughed. A cruel, wet sound. That is true, Mom. Her father probably drank wine out of a box in the back of his truck, right, Eli? You would not know a Pinot Noir from grape juice, would you? The guests chuckled nervously. They were uncomfortable, but nobody said a word. They were all on Preston S. payroll or hoping to be. I looked up. I looked Preston in the eye. I know enough about wine to know that you do not spill it on a lady's dignity. Preston, I said. My voice was low, but it cut through the laughter. And I know enough about being a man to know you do not humiliate your wife in public. The room went deadly silent. Preston S.'s face turned red. The vein in his forehead began to throb. He was not used to the help talking back. Excuse me, Preston stood up, swaying slightly. Are you lecturing me? You, a man who lives in a one-bedroom apartment that smells like cabbage. You are eating my food, drinking my water, and sitting in my house. You do not get to speak. You are here because Maya begged me. You are a charity case, Eli, just like your daughter. I saw Maya's shoulders stiffen. She looked at me, then she looked at her husband. Something in her snapped. Maybe it was the insult to me. Maybe it was 5 years of silence finally breaking. Stop it, Preston, Maya said. Her voice was shaking, but it was clear. Do not speak to my father that way. He is 10 times the man you will ever be. And this house, this food, I am the one who wrote the code for your software, Preston. I am the one who fixed your bugs last week so you could launch on time. I am not a charity case. I am the reason you have a job. Preston looked at her as if she had grown a second head. His ego, already fragile from the alcohol and the business stress, shattered. You think you are smart, he hissed, walking toward her. You think you are the talent? You are nothing. You are my wife. You are property. He raised his hand. I started to stand up, but I was at the other end of the room. I was too far away. The slap was loud, brutal. It knocked Maya's head to the side. She stumbled back, clutching the edge of the table to keep from falling. Her cheek turned crimson instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The guests looked down at their plates. The servers froze. Then the clapping started. Slow, rhythmic clapping. I looked at Victoria. She was smiling. A wide, grotesque smile. Bravo, she said, raising her glass. Finally. Someone had to teach her some respect. Do not let her climb on your head, son. These women, they take an inch and they think they own the house. Show her who is boss. Preston stood there, breathing heavily, his hand still raised, looking at Maya with a mix of rage and satisfaction. My daughter looked at me. Her eyes were filled with tears, but also with shame. She was waiting for me to do something. She was waiting for her dad to come and save her. In my younger days, I would have crossed that room and broken Preston S.'s jaw. I would have broken every bone in his hand. But I was not just a father anymore. I was a strategist. Violence would get me arrested. Violence would give them a story to spin. They would tell the police the crazy old black man attacked the respected CEO. I would end up in jail, and Maya would be left alone with them. No, I needed something stronger than a fist. I stood up slowly. I buttoned my jacket. I picked up my napkin and wiped my mouth. I did not look at Maya. I looked at Preston. I stared at him for 3 full seconds. I memorized the arrogance on his face. I memorized the cruelty in Victoria S.'s eyes. You have made a mistake, son, I said quietly. Preston laughed. What are you going to do, old man? Drive your truck over me? Get out. Get out of my house before I have security throw you out. I did not answer. I turned and walked toward the French doors that led to the balcony. Run away, Victoria jeered. Go back to the ghetto. Eli. I stepped out into the cool night air. I closed the glass doors behind me, muffling the sound of their laughter. I could see them through the glass. Preston was pouring himself another drink. Victoria was patting his arm, comforting him as if he were the victim. My hands were shaking not from fear but from the effort of controlling the rage that was boiling in my gut. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was an old Nokia, the kind that holds a charge for a week. I dialed a number I had not called in 10 years. It rang once. Yes, a deep voice answered. No pleasantries, no names. It is Eli, I said. My voice sounded like grinding stones. There was a pause, then a shift in tone. Professional, alert. We thought you were retired, sir. I said, looking through the glass at my daughter weeping while her husband laughed. But I have a pest problem. I am at the Sterling Estate on Highland Drive. We know where you are, sir. We have been monitoring the assets. I want it all gone, I said. The funding, the credit lines, the cars, the house, everything. Execute Protocol Omega. Protocol Omega. The voice hesitated for a fraction of a second. Sir, that is the nuclear option. That is total liquidation. That destroys the company. I know what it means, I said, watching Preston raise a toast to his mother. Burn it down, Silas. Leave them with nothing but the clothes on their backs. And send the extraction team. I have a package to pick up. Understood. ETA 4 minutes. I hung up the phone. I put it back in my pocket. I stood there in the dark, watching the party inside. They were eating, drinking, and laughing, unaware that the ground beneath their feet had already turned to ash. Preston thought he had slapped his wife. He did not realize he had just slapped the hand of God. And Judgment Day was pulling into the driveway. The balcony was cold, but I did not feel it. My blood was running hot, fueled by the adrenaline of a man who has finally pushed the button he swore he would never use. I stood there in the dark, watching them through the glass like a scientist observing a failed experiment. Inside, the party was slowly returning to normal, or at least their version of normal. The guests were laughing again, their voices a low murmur of gossip and feigned polite conversation. They were probably whispering about how the old man had finally snapped and run off. Preston was leaning against the bar, looking pleased with himself. He was swirling his drink, acting the part of the victor. He thought he had won. He thought he had asserted his dominance over his wife and her embarrassing father. Victoria was next to him, practically glowing. She was whispering in his ear, probably telling him how proud she was that he had finally put his foot down. They were so confident, so arrogant. They had no idea that their entire world was about to end in exactly 4 minutes. I checked my watch. The old Timex my wife gave me 40 years ago. It never lost a second. 3 minutes. Inside, Maya was still standing by the table. She had not moved. She was holding a napkin to her cheek, trying to stop the tears. No one was comforting her. Not one of these so-called friends. Not one of these business partners. They were all too afraid of Preston or too indifferent to care. 2 minutes. I saw Preston gesture to a waiter. He pointed at the spot where Maya had spilled the wine and laughed. He was making a joke out of it. He was making a joke out of my daughter's humiliation. 1 minute. I put my phone back in my pocket. I straightened my tie. I took a deep breath of the night air. It smelled of jasmine and impending justice. Then I saw the headlights. 2 black SUVs rolled up the long driveway, moving fast but silent. They did not have sirens. They did not have flashing lights. They looked like shadows moving through the night. They stopped right in front of the main entrance, blocking Preston's prized Ferrari. Inside the house, no one noticed. The music was too loud. The laughter was too self-absorbed. 0. The front doors of the mansion swung open. Not just pushed open, but thrown open with force. The music died instantly. The laughter stopped. Every head in the room turned toward the entrance. 4 men walked in. They were not police. They were not security guards. They were something much more terrifying. They wore tailored black suits that cost more than most people's cars. They moved with a synchronized precision that screamed military training. They wore earpieces and their faces were stone. Leading them was a man I knew very well, Mr. Silas. Silas was 6 feet 4 inches of pure muscle and intellect. He was the head of security for Bennett Holdings, my company. He was a former Navy SEAL who had seen things that would make these soft suburbanites wet themselves. He did not smile. He did not blink. Preston frowned, confused. He took a step forward, his glass still in his hand. "Excuse me?" he demanded, his voice slurring slightly. "Who the hell are you? This is a private party. Get out before I call the cops." Silas did not even look at him. He walked straight past the guests, parting the crowd like the Red Sea. His men fanned out, securing the exits, not to keep people in, but to make sure the target could not run. Silas stopped 3 feet from Preston. He towered over my son-in-law. He looked at him with the kind of cold professional detachment a butcher has for a piece of meat. "Mr. Preston Sterling?" Silas asked. His voice was deep, resonating through the silent room. "Yes, I am. Preston Sterling," Preston stammered, trying to regain his bravado. "And I am the owner of this house." "Now who are you?" Silas reached into his jacket pocket. Preston flinched, thinking it was a weapon. Victoria gasped, clutching her pearls. But Silas pulled out a document, a single sheet of paper with a gold seal at the top. "My name is Silas Vance. I represent the Asset Protection Division of Bennett Holdings. Bennett Holdings. Preston laughed nervously, looking around at his guests. I have never heard of you. I do not do business with you. Silas ignored him. He looked at the document, then back at Preston. According to the terms of your angel investment agreement signed 5 years ago, all assets currently in your possession, including this property, the vehicle outside, and the corporate credit lines, are technically the property of the trust until the vesting period is complete. Preston blinked. What? That is ridiculous. My investors are a private equity group in New York. I know them. You know the shell company, Silas corrected. You do not know the parent company. Preston's face started to lose its color. What are you talking about? Silas took a step closer. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Clause 4, Section B of your contract, Silas recited from memory. The Morals Clause. It states that any act of public violence, criminal behavior, or conduct that brings disrepute to the brand is grounds for immediate termination of the agreement and immediate repossession of all funded assets. Preston laughed again, but this time it sounded like a choke. Violence. What violence? I didn't do anything. Silas slowly turned his head. He looked at Maya, still standing by the table, the red mark on her cheek glowing like a beacon. Then he looked up at the corner of the room where a small black dome camera was mounted on the ceiling. We have access to the security feed, Mr. Sterling, Silas said. We saw everything. The assault on your wife, the verbal abuse. It is all recorded, and it is all a violation. Preston looked at the camera, then back at Silas. Wait a minute. You cannot just come in here and... I am not here to debate, Silas cut him off. I am here to collect. Silas held out his hand, palm up. Expectant. The black card, Silas said. The American Express Centurion, the one tied to the corporate expense account. Hand it over. Preston clutched his wallet. You are joking. That is my card. That is my money. It is the trust's money, Silas said, his voice hardening. And the trust has just cut you off. Hand it over, or I will take it. Preston looked at Silas's eyes. He saw no mercy there. He saw only the promise of pain if he resisted. His hand shook as he reached into his pocket. He pulled out the heavy black metal card, the symbol of his status, the source of his arrogance. He dropped it into Silas's hand. Silas passed the card to one of his men, who immediately snapped it in half. The sound was sharp, like a bone breaking. Now the car, Silas continued. The Ferrari 488 Pista, keys. Preston's eyes went wide. No, not the car. Please. That is mine, leased, Silas said. By the company, which you no longer control. Keys. Victoria stepped forward, her face red with indignation. This is an outrage. I am calling the police. You cannot treat my son like this. He is a CEO. Silas turned to look at her. He gave her a look that could freeze water. You can call the police, ma'am, Silas said calmly. But I should warn you, we have already forwarded the video of the assault to the district attorney. If the police come, they are not coming for us. They are coming for him. Victoria closed her mouth. She looked at Preston. She looked at the red mark on Maya's face. She realized the trap she had cheered for had just snapped shut on her own leg. Preston threw the keys at Silas. Fine, take it. It is just a car. I can buy 10 more. Silas caught the keys without flinching. And finally Silas said, stepping into Preston's personal space. The house. Preston staggered back. What? This estate is owned by the holding company, Silas said. You live here as a tenant who has just violated his lease. You have exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises. Vacate, Preston screamed. Tonight, but where am I supposed to go? That is not my concern, Silas said. But I suggest you start packing. My men will escort you to the gate in 60 minutes. Anything left behind becomes the property of the trust. The room was dead silent. The guests were staring in open-mouthed horror. This wasn't just a scene. This was an execution. A public dismantling of a man who thought he was untouchable. Preston looked around the room. He looked for an ally. He looked for a friend. But no one made eye contact. They were all calculating their own distance from the blast zone. Then Preston looked at Maya. Maya, he shouted, desperate now. Tell them this is crazy. Tell them you own half of this. Maya looked up. She looked at her husband, the man who had hit her. Then she looked at the balcony where I was standing in the shadows. She didn't know I was the one pulling the strings. She didn't know I owned Bennett Holdings. She just saw Justice walking through the door. I don't own anything, Preston Maya whispered. You always told me everything was yours. Remember, Preston looked like he had been punched in the gut. Silas turned to his men. Begin the inventory. Lock down the office. Secure the servers. As the men moved into action, Silas looked up toward the balcony. He gave a barely perceptible nod. It was done. The king had been dethroned. The castle had been seized. I watched Preston sink into a chair, his head in his hands. Victoria was yelling at a waiter demanding a drink, but the waiter walked away. The party was over. I opened the glass door and stepped back into the room. I walked past Silas, who did not acknowledge me as per my orders. I walked straight to Maya. She looked at me, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. "Dad," she whispered, "what is happening? Who are these people?" I took her hand. It was cold as ice. "I don't know, honey." I lied, my voice calm and steady. "But it looks like the bill has finally come due." I looked at Preston one last time. He was looking at his broken credit card on the floor. He didn't even look up at me. He was too busy mourning his money to mourn his marriage. "Come on, Maya," I said, gently pulling her toward the door. "Let's get Leo." "We are leaving." "Leaving?" she asked, looking back at her husband. "Yes," I said. "You don't live here anymore, and neither does he." We walked out of the dining room, leaving the chaos behind us. I could hear Victoria screaming my name, blaming me for bringing bad luck. I could hear Preston sobbing, but I didn't care. I had fired the first shot, and I had not missed. The silence in the room lasted exactly 3 seconds before it was shattered by the sound of a man losing his mind. Preston stood in the center of his living room, stripped of his car, his credit card, and his dignity. He looked at the broken pieces of black plastic on the floor, and then he looked at Mr. Silas. The alcohol in Preston's blood mixed with his rage created a volatile cocktail. He forgot that he was a soft man living in a hard world. He forgot that the man standing in front of him was a trained weapon. "You think you can do this to me?" Preston screamed, his face twisting into a mask of ugly entitlement. "Do you know who I am? I am Preston Sterling. This is my house. Get out!" He lunged. It was a pathetic, clumsy move. He swung his fist toward Silas's jaw, a punch that had no weight behind it, only desperation. Silas did not even blink. He did not step back. He simply shifted his weight. With a movement almost too fast to see, he caught Preston's wrist. There was a sickening twist, a sharp cry of pain, and then the sound of a body hitting the floor hard. It wasn't a fight, it was a dismissal. Preston landed on his chest, his arm pinned behind his back, his face pressed into the expensive Persian rug he was so proud of. Silas looked down at him, his expression unchanged. "Assaulting a retrieval agent," Silas stated calmly, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "That is another violation of the agreement." Victoria let out a shriek that sounded like a siren. "Help!" she screamed, running toward the guests who were now backing away toward the walls. "Call the police. They are killing him. They are murdering my son. You are all witnesses. Call 911. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling so hard she could barely tap the screen. She looked at Silas, and then she looked at me, standing by the balcony doors. She pointed a manicured finger at me. "You did this. You brought these thugs here. I will have you arrested. I will have you thrown in a hole so deep you will never see the sun again." I did not look at her. Her threats were as empty as her bank account was about to be. I stepped into the room. I walked past the terrified guests who parted for me like I was a disease. I walked past Silas, who was holding Preston down with one hand. I walked past Preston, who was groaning into the carpet, cursing my name. I walked straight to Maya. My daughter was standing by the dining table, frozen. She was shaking violently. Her hand was still covering the red mark on her cheek where her husband had slapped her. Her eyes were wide, darting between the man on the floor and me. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights, terrified to move, terrified to breathe. I stopped in front of her. I saw the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders. I saw the brilliant woman who had graduated top of her class. And I saw the battered wife who had been slowly broken down piece by piece over 5 years. "Maya," I said, my voice low and steady. "Go upstairs." She blinked, looking at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. "Dad," she whispered. "Dad, we can't." He will be so angry. We have to fix this. Maybe if we apologize. The words hit me harder than any punch. Apologize. After he hit her. After he humiliated her. The brainwashing ran deep. Preston had convinced her that his anger was her fault, that his failures were her responsibility. I reached out and took her hands. They were ice cold. Look at me, Maya. Look at me. She raised her eyes to mine. There is no fixing this, I said. The bridge is burned. The house is gone. You have exactly 10 minutes. Go upstairs. Get Leo. Pack a bag. Just the essentials. We are leaving. Maya pulled her hands away, glancing nervously at Preston, who was now struggling against Silas's grip. I can't leave him. Dad, she stammered, tears spilling over. He needs me. He is just stressed. The company, the money. If I leave now, he will never forgive me. He said if I ever walked out, he would take Leo. He said he would destroy me. On the floor, Preston lifted his head. He spat blood onto the rug. You walk out that door, Maya, and you are dead to me. He screamed, his voice raw. You hear me. You take my son and I will bury you. You will be begging on the street. You are nothing without me. Nothing. Maya flinched, her body curling inward. The fear was physical. It was a chain around her neck. I felt a cold fury rising in my chest, but I kept it locked down. I needed to be the anchor, not the storm. I stepped between her and Preston, blocking her view of him. I forced her to look only at me. Maya listened to me very carefully. I said, my voice hardening. That man on the floor is not your husband. He is your captor. He just lost his money, he lost his car, and he lost his house. The only thing he has left to control is you. I pointed to the door where the night air was waiting. You have a choice to make tonight, baby girl, and you have to make it right now. You can stay here and be his punching bag. You can stay here and let him blame you for his failures until he hits you again. And next time, he won't stop at a slap. Next time it will be a fist. Next time it might be in front of Leo. Maya sobbed a sound of pure heartbreak. Or I continued, softening my tone. You can be my daughter. You can walk out that door with your head high. You can save your son from watching his mother be abused. I leaned in closer. You are the one who wrote the code, Maya. You are the one who built this life. He is just the parasite living off your light. Do not let him dim you out. Maya looked at me. She looked at the red mark on her face reflected in the mirror on the wall. She looked at Victoria, who was now screaming at Silas, calling him a racial slur. Something shifted in her eyes. The fear didn't disappear, but a tiny spark of anger replaced it. She took a deep, shuddering breath. Leo is sleeping, she whispered. Then wake him up, I said. I will be waiting at the door. She nodded once. Then she turned and ran toward the stairs. Victoria tried to block her path. Where do you think you are going? Victoria screeched, grabbing Maya's arm. You ungrateful little... I did not have to move. One of Silas's men stepped forward, simply imposing his size between Victoria and my daughter. Victoria let go, stumbling back. I turned to Silas. Get him off the floor, I said, gesturing to Preston. Let him stand up. I want him to see this. Silas released his grip. Preston scrambled to his feet, rubbing his wrist. His suit was rumpled, his hair wild. He looked at me with pure hatred. You are going to pay for this, Eli, he spat. You think you are tough. You are just a garbage man. I will sue you for everything you have. I looked at him calmly. You can try, son, but lawyers cost money. And as of 5 minutes ago, you don't have any. Preston opened his mouth to argue, but then he heard it. The sound of suitcases rolling on the hardwood floor. We all looked up. Maya was coming down the grand staircase. She was wearing a coat over her dress. She was pulling a small rolling bag with one hand and holding Leo's hand with the other. My grandson Leo was 8 years old. He was wearing his Star Wars pajamas, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He looked confused, scared, but when he saw me, his face lit up. Grandpa Eli, he asked, his voice small in the big, echoing room. I walked over to the bottom of the stairs. Hey, champ, I said, forcing a smile. We are going on a little adventure. Preston stepped forward. Leo, come here. Come to Daddy. Leo stopped. He looked at his father. He saw the red face, the wild eyes, the spit on his chin. He saw his mother's swollen cheek. Leo looked at Preston, and then he tightened his grip on Maya's hand. He took a step closer to his mother. Preston looked like he had been slapped again. His own son was afraid of him. Maya walked past him. She did not look at him. She did not look at Victoria. She walked straight to the front door where the wind was blowing in. I followed them. "You are making a mistake, Maya," Preston screamed after us, running to the doorway. "You will be back. You will come crawling back in a week when you realize you are nothing." I stopped at the threshold. I turned around one last time. "She won't be back, Preston," I said, "and neither will your luck." I stepped out into the night. Silas and his men followed, forming a protective wall around us as we walked to my car. We left the Ferrari sitting in the driveway, a useless piece of metal. We left the mansion glowing with lights, a beautiful cage with the door finally open. Maya buckled Leo into the back seat of my old Ford. She got into the front seat. She was shaking again, but this time it was the shaking of adrenaline of release. I got in the driver's seat. The car smelled of peppermint and old leather. It smelled like safety. I started the engine. We drove down the long, winding driveway past the security gates that were now locked open. I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw Preston standing in the driveway, screaming into the dark. We drove in silence for a long time. The city lights flickered past us. Leo fell back asleep, his head resting on his travel pillow. "Where are we going, Dad?" Maya asked quietly, staring out the window. I don't have anywhere to go." He froze the accounts. "I don't have cash for a hotel." "We are going home," I said. "Not the big house I grew up in. That was sold years ago." I drove us to the Midtown district, to a neighborhood that Preston would call a slum. I pulled up in front of a 6-story brick building. It was old, built in the 20s, with iron fire escapes zigzagging down the front. Maya looked up at the building. Her face fell slightly. She thought this was all I had. She thought I was taking her to a squalid little apartment. "I know it's not a mansion, honey," I said, parking the car. "But the heat works, and the locks are strong." We got out. I carried Leo. Maya pulled the bag. I used my key to open the heavy steel front door. We walked into the lobby. It was clean, simple, with black and white tiled floors. I led them to the elevator. I pressed the button for the top floor. When the doors opened, Maya gasped. It was not a cramped apartment. It was the entire top floor converted into a loft. High ceilings, exposed brick walls, polished wood floors. It was warm. It was solid. It was filled with books and comfortable leather furniture. "This is yours?" Maya asked, walking in, looking around in amazement. "I own the building, Maya," I said, closing the door and locking the 3 deadbolts. "I bought it 20 years ago. It's not fancy, but it's mine, and now it's yours." I carried Leo to the guest room and tucked him into a soft bed. I walked back out to the living room. Maya was standing by the window looking out at the city skyline. She was still holding her cheek. I went to the kitchen and wrapped some ice in a towel. I walked over and handed it to her. She took it and pressed it against her face. She closed her eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. "He is going to come for us, Dad," she whispered. "He is going to destroy us." I put my arm around her shoulders. I felt how thin she was, how fragile she had become. "Let him come," I said. "He thinks he is fighting a truck driver. He doesn't know he just declared war on the Union." I looked out the window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Preston was realizing that his credit cards didn't work. Somewhere out there, Victoria was realizing her social status was evaporating. "Go to sleep, baby girl," I said, kissing her forehead. "You are safe here." Maya went to her room. I sat down in my leather armchair in the dark. I didn't sleep. I sat there watching the door, waiting. I had extracted my family from the fire. But the war had just begun. And tomorrow, I was going to burn the rest of their world to the ground. The morning sun hit the exposed brick walls of my loft, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny suspended memories. For a brief moment, as I poured black coffee into 2 chipped mugs, the world felt peaceful. Leo was still asleep in the guest room, his breathing heavy and rhythmic. The events of the previous night, the slap, the extraction, the look on Preston's face seemed like a nightmare that vanished with the dawn. But nightmares in the 21st century do not vanish. They get uploaded to the cloud. I found Maya sitting at the small kitchen island. She was staring at her phone, her face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, but it wasn't sadness I saw in them anymore. It was terror. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Look at this. Look at what she did." I set the coffee down and took the phone from her hand. It was open to Facebook, Victoria Sterling's profile. A post made 3 hours ago already had 400 likes and dozens of comments. The photo was a selfie of Victoria looking distraught, holding a tissue to her dry eyes. The caption read, "My heart is shattered into a million pieces. Last night my son's wife Maya had a psychotic break at our anniversary party. She attacked Preston in a drunken rage, and then her father, a violent man with a criminal history, assaulted my son and kidnapped our grandson. We are terrified for little Leo's safety. Please pray for us. And if you see Maya, tell her to bring our baby home. We just want to get her the help she needs." I scrolled down. The comments were a cesspool. People I knew. People who had smiled at Maya at the party were now calling her a monster. They were calling me a thug. They were painting Preston as the saint who had tried to save a broken woman. "It is a smear campaign, Maya," I said, handing the phone back to her. "It is what cowards do when they lose control of the narrative. They lie. But people believe it." Dad, Maya cried, tears spilling onto the screen. "Look at these comments. They think I am crazy. They think I kidnapped my own son. What if they call the police? What if child services comes? Let them come," I said calmly, taking a sip of my coffee. "The truth has a way of coming out, Maya. We have the footage from the restaurant. We have the bruises on your face. Victoria can type whatever she wants, but she cannot type away a felony assault charge." Before Maya could answer, a sound from the guest room stopped our hearts. It was a wheeze, a high-pitched whistling sound that every parent of an asthmatic child knows better than their own name. "Leo." Maya jumped up, knocking her chair over. She ran into the room and I followed close behind. Leo was sitting up in bed, clutching his chest, his face pale. He was gasping for air, his little ribs retracting with every desperate breath. The stress of the previous night, the dusty air of the old building, it had triggered an attack. Inhaler. Maya shouted frantically, searching through the bag she had packed. "Where is the inhaler?" She dumped the contents of the bag onto the floor. Clothes, toys, a toothbrush. No inhaler. In her panic to leave the mansion, she had left his medication on the nightstand. "Oh my God," Maya gasped, her hands shaking. I left it at the house. I grabbed my keys. "There is a 24-hour pharmacy 3 blocks down," I said. "Get your shoes, we go now." We drove in silence. Leo was in the back seat, leaning against me while Maya drove. I rubbed his back, trying to keep him calm, trying to match my breathing to his, but inside I was raging. This was Preston's fault. This was the fallout of his cruelty. We ran into the pharmacy. The fluorescent lights were humming loudly. Maya ran to the counter, her hair messy, her coat thrown over her pajamas. She looked exactly like the unstable woman Victoria had described on Facebook. "I need an albuterol inhaler," Maya told the pharmacist, a young man who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. "For my son. He is having an attack." The pharmacist looked at Leo, who was wheezing against my leg. "Do you have a prescription on file?" "Yes," Maya said. "Under Leo Sterling, or maybe under Preston Sterling's insurance." The pharmacist typed slowly on his computer. I watched Maya's hands. She was gripping the counter so hard her knuckles were white. "Okay, I see it," the pharmacist said. "That will be $45 for the CO pay." Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out her wallet. She pulled out her debit card, the joint account she shared with Preston. She swiped it. Beep. Declined. Maya frowned. She swiped it again. Harder this time. Beep. Declined. Her hands started to shake uncontrollably. She pulled out a credit card, one with her name on it. Beep. Declined. I watched her crumble. I saw the exact moment the reality hit her. Preston hadn't just locked the house. He had locked her life. He had cut off her access to money, knowing she had nothing of her own. He knew Leo had asthma. He knew she would need things, and he did it anyway. I don't understand," Maya stammered, looking at the pharmacist with pleading eyes. "There is money in there. My husband. He must have... Please. My son cannot breathe. Can I pay you later? I promise I will bring cash." The pharmacist shook his head. "I am sorry, ma'am. I cannot release the medication without payment. System won't let me." Maya turned to me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a panic that was bordering on hysteria. "Dad, I have no money. He took it all. He's going to die, Dad. He's going to die because I don't have $45. She was hyperventilating now, mirroring Leo's struggle. The shame was eating her alive. The shame of a mother who cannot provide the one thing her child needs to survive. I stepped forward. I placed a hand on Maya's shoulder, steadying her. "Breathe, Maya," I said softly. I reached into the back pocket of my worn-out corduroy trousers. I pulled out a wallet that was held together by duct tape. Inside, nestled among pictures of Maya as a baby and old receipts, was a single card. It wasn't a black card like Preston's. It was a navy blue debit card from a credit union that didn't even exist anymore. It had been bought out years ago, but the card was still valid. The plastic was peeling at the corners. The numbers were faded, almost illegible. "Use this," I said, handing it to her. Maya looked at the card. She looked at me. She knew I lived on a pension. She knew I clipped coupons. She hesitated, thinking that this $45 might be my grocery money for the week. "Dad, no," she whispered. "I can't take your money." "Take the card, Maya," I said, my voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "Leo needs to breathe." She took it with trembling fingers. She handed it to the pharmacist. He looked at it skeptically. It looked like a piece of junk plastic. He probably thought it would decline too. He swiped it. There was a pause, a long, agonizing pause where the machine communicated with the bank. "Approved." The receipt printer chugged to life, spitting out a long strip of paper. Maya let out a sob of relief. She grabbed the inhaler immediately, tearing open the box and bringing it to Leo's lips. "Take a deep breath, buddy," she said, pressing the canister. 1, 2. Leo inhaled. The medicine hit his lungs. His shoulders dropped. The wheezing began to subside. The color started to return to his cheeks. I watched them, my heart rate slowly returning to normal. But the drama wasn't over. The pharmacist was staring at his screen. He was frowning. He looked at the receipt he had just printed. Then he looked at me. He looked at my old jacket, my scuffed shoes, my gray beard. "Is there a problem, son?" I asked, staring him down. "No, sir," the pharmacist said, his voice suddenly respectful, almost reverent. "No problem at all. Would you like your balance printed on the receipt?" "No," I said quickly, "just the medication." But it was too late. He had already torn the slip off. He handed it to Maya along with the card. Maya was busy checking Leo, but as we walked away toward the exit, she glanced down at the paper in her hand. She stopped walking. We were in the middle of the aisle, surrounded by shampoos and vitamins. Maya stood frozen, staring at the receipt. "Dad," she said. "Yeah, honey." She turned to look at me. Her expression was unreadable. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was shock. "Dad, this receipt, it says available balance." I sighed. I tried to snatch the paper from her, but she pulled it away. "It says the balance is—" She trailed off, counting the digits. "Dad, there are 7 zeros here." I looked around to make sure no one was listening. "It is a glitch, Maya," I said, lowering my voice. "Bank error. Happens all the time with these old cards." "No," she said, shaking her head slowly. "No, Dad. Glitches don't look like this. This says you have $12 million in your checking account." She looked at me, and for the first time she really saw me. She saw the man who had extracted her from a mansion with a tactical team. She saw the man who had shut down Preston's life with a phone call, and now she saw the man who carried a fortune in his back pocket wrapped in duct tape. "Who are you?" she whispered. I took the receipt from her hand and crumpled it into a ball. I put it in my pocket. I picked up Leo, who was now breathing easily. "I am your father, Maya," I said. "And right now I am the guy who is going to take you home and make you breakfast. We can talk about banking errors later." I walked toward the automatic doors. Maya stood there for a moment longer, watching me. She was beginning to realize that the story of her life, the story of the poor truck driver father, might have been a lie. But as she followed me out into the parking lot, she realized it was the only lie that had ever kept her safe. Preston had locked the accounts. He thought he had starved us out. He didn't know that he was trying to drown a fish. We weren't broke. We were just getting started. And as I drove away from that pharmacy, I knew that the next time Preston checked his own bank balance, he was going to feel exactly how Maya felt when that machine beeped declined. Except for him, there would be no Dad to hand him a lifeline. The coffee in the paper cup was bitter and burned, but it was hot, and on a gray Tuesday morning in Detroit, that was all that mattered. I sat at a small wobbly table in the window seat of a bagel shop directly across the street from the gleaming glass tower that housed Sterling Technologies. I wore a knit cap pulled low over my ears and a heavy canvas jacket that had seen better days. To the young professionals rushing past with their laptops and lattes, I was just another old man killing time, perhaps waiting for a bus that would never come. I was invisible, and that is exactly how I liked it. I checked my watch. It was 8:45. Preston was late. Usually he would have arrived at 8 sharp, roaring into the reserved parking spot in his Ferrari, stepping out like he was conquering a country. But today, there was no Ferrari. The Ferrari was sitting in an impound lot owned by my holding company. Today, Preston arrived in a yellow taxicab. I watched him step out onto the wet pavement. He looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled, likely pulled from the back of a closet because his wardrobe was locked inside the mansion he could no longer enter. He was trying to project confidence, smoothing his tie and shooting his cuffs, but I could see the tremor in his hands from across the street. He was a man running on fumes and denial. He truly believed that if he could just get into his office, if he could just sit in his ergonomic leather chair, he could fix this. He thought the events of last night were a misunderstanding, a glitch in the matrix that he could code his way out of. He marched toward the revolving doors, his chin up, ignoring the taxi driver who was yelling something about the tip. Preston walked into the lobby of the building. It was a cathedral of marble and steel, a place designed to make you feel small. I took a sip of my coffee and pulled my phone from my pocket. I dialed a number I had saved simply as the board. On the other end, a voice answered immediately. It was Frank, a man I had walked picket lines with in the 80s. Frank was now the head of the Pension Fund Investment Committee, the entity that, unbeknownst to Preston, was the mysterious angel investor that had kept his company afloat for 3 years. "Is he there?" Frank asked, his voice gravelly and calm. "He just walked in," I said, watching Preston approach the security turnstiles. "Do we pull the plug?" Frank asked. "Not yet," I said. "Wait until he tries to swipe. I want him to feel the door lock before the floor drops out." I watched through the glass window of the bagel shop. Preston walked up to the sleek glass barriers that separated the lobby from the elevators. He didn't even look at the security guard, a young man named Marcus, who Preston had undoubtedly ignored every morning for 5 years. Preston pulled his lanyard from his pocket and slapped his access card against the reader. From across the street, I couldn't hear the sound, but I knew what it sounded like. A harsh, unforgiving buzz. A red light flashing. Access denied. Preston frowned. He wiped the card on his jacket, thinking it was dirty. He tried again. Buzz. Red light. He slapped the machine in frustration. He looked around embarrassed. He tried a third time, jamming the card against the plastic. Buzz. That was when Marcus, the security guard, stepped out from behind the desk. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the body language perfectly. Marcus held up a hand, palm out. "Stop!" Preston started shouting. I saw his mouth moving rapidly, his arms flailing. He was pointing at the elevator, pointing at his chest, probably screaming, "Do you know who I am? I am the CEO of this company. Open this gate." Marcus didn't move. He shook his head slowly. He pointed to a clipboard on his desk. The Do Not Admit list. Preston's face turned a shade of crimson that matched the red light on the turnstile. He grabbed the turnstile, trying to force his way through, trying to physically push past the barrier. Marcus stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Preston's chest, pushing him back. "Now, Frank," I whispered into the phone. "Copy that," Frank said, freezing the operating capital. "Now." I hung up. I watched the scene unfold like a silent movie, but I knew the script by heart. Inside the building, the chaos was just beginning. Preston was still arguing with the guard, demanding to see the building manager when the elevator doors behind the turnstiles opened. A group of people walked out. They weren't security. They were Preston's employees, his CFO, a nervous man named David, and his HR director, a woman named Sarah. They walked up to the turnstiles from the inside. They didn't open the gate for him. They stood on the other side looking at him through the glass. David held up a phone. He looked pale, terrified. I imagined what he was saying. "Preston, the accounts. They are empty." Preston froze. He stopped shouting at the guard. He looked at his CFO. He pressed his face against the glass like a prisoner visiting day. "What do you mean empty?" I imagined him screaming. David shook his head. He held up a tablet showing a banking app. Zero. The payroll account, the operating expenses, the rent fund, all of it. The angel investor withdrew the liquidity. They exercised the recall clause. We can't make payroll on Friday, Preston. We can't even pay the electric bill. I saw Preston slide down. He didn't fall, he just deflated. He slumped against the turnstile, his expensive suit sliding against the cold glass. The employees behind him were looking at each other, whispering. They were realizing that their jobs were gone. They were realizing that the man who drove the Ferrari and bragged about disrupting the industry didn't even have enough money to buy them lunch. I felt a pang of sympathy, not for Preston, but for the workers. But I had already made arrangements for them. Bennett Holdings would acquire the company's assets out of bankruptcy next week, and we would rehire the staff. But Preston had to burn. He looked around the lobby. People were staring. The other tenants of the building, businessmen in real suits with real jobs, were walking past him, shaking their heads. He was no longer the golden boy of the tech world. He was a trespasser. He was a nuisance. He pulled out his phone. He started dialing frantically. He was probably calling Victoria. He was probably calling his lawyers. But no one was going to answer. His phone service was part of the corporate package. And then right on cue, the screen of his phone went dark. Remote wipe. Protocol Omega included data security. He stared at the black screen of his dead phone. He looked at the locked gate. He looked at his employees turning their backs on him, walking away to pack their desks. He was alone. I took the last sip of my coffee. It was cold now, but it tasted like victory. Preston Sterling had built his entire identity on access. Access to money, access to status, access to women he could control. He thought he was a king because he stood in a castle. He never realized that the castle was built on rented land, and I was the landlord. He slammed his fist against the glass one last time, a silent scream of impotent rage. Then he turned around. He looked out at the street. He looked right at the bagel shop. For a second, our eyes met across the 4 lanes of traffic. He couldn't see me clearly through the glare and the rain. He just saw an old black man in a knit cap drinking coffee. He didn't recognize me. He didn't see the father-in-law he had mocked the night before. He just saw a nobody. He looked away, dismissing me, stumbling back out onto the street into the rain. He stood on the curb, looking left and right, realizing he had no car, no money for a taxi, and no home to go to. I stood up. I dropped a $5 bill on the table for the waitress. "Keep the change," I whispered. I walked out of the shop, pulling my collar up against the wind. I didn't look at Preston as I walked to my car parked down the block. I didn't need to rub it in. The rain was doing a good enough job of that. He was finding out the hard way that there is a difference between net worth and self-worth. His net worth was now 0, and his self-worth, well, that had disappeared the moment he raised his hand against my daughter. I got into my Ford and started the engine. I had one more stop to make. Preston was broken, but the snake still had a head. Victoria was still out there spinning her lies on the internet. And while I had cut off the money, I still had to cut off the noise. I put the car in drive and merged into traffic, leaving my son-in-law standing on the corner, soaking wet, waiting for a savior that wasn't coming. A wounded animal does not retreat to its den to heal. It lashes out. It hunts for something smaller, something weaker, something it can sink its teeth into to prove it is still atop the food chain. I knew Victoria Sterling better than she knew herself. I knew that after the humiliation of the party and the freezing of her son's assets, she would not go quietly into the night. She needed leverage. She needed a hostage. And in her twisted mind, there was only one pawn left on the board that could force Maya and me to surrender: my grandson Leo. I was parked across the street from the elementary school in my beat-up Ford sedan. I had been there since the first bell rang that morning, watching the entrance like a hawk. I had a feeling in my gut, the kind of feeling that used to tell me when a strike was about to turn violent back in my union days. I knew she was coming. Preston was too broken to move, but Victoria was fueled by spite. She believed that Leo was her property, a Sterling heir, and that possessing him would give her back the control she had lost. At 2:30 in the afternoon, a taxi pulled up to the curb. It wasn't the luxury town car she usually commanded. It was a yellow cab with a dented fender. Victoria stepped out. She was wearing sunglasses big enough to cover half her face and a trench coat that looked like she was trying to be incognito, but her posture gave her away. She walked with that same entitlement, marching up the school steps as if she owned the bricks they were made of. I did not run after her immediately. I picked up my phone and speed-dialed Mr. Vance. "She is here," I said. "I am already in the hallway," Vance replied. I have been drinking bad coffee in the teacher's lounge for an hour, Eli. I am ready. I hung up and got out of the car. I didn't rush. I wanted to see her try. I wanted to see her face when she realized that even her own blood had turned against her. I walked into the school building. The smell of floor wax and chalk dust hit me, bringing back memories of picking up Maya when she was a little girl. I walked toward the main office. The glass walls allowed me to see everything that was happening inside. Victoria was standing at the reception desk. She had removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were red and puffy, a calculated performance of a grieving grandmother. She was leaning over the counter speaking to Mrs. Gable, the school secretary, a sweet woman who looked completely overwhelmed. "I just need to pick up my grandson, Leo Sterling," Victoria was saying, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "There has been a family emergency, a terrible tragedy. His mother, oh God, poor Maya. She is having a mental breakdown. We need to get Leo to safety immediately before she tries to come here." Mrs. Gable looked at her computer screen, then back at Victoria. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Sterling, but Leo is not on the early dismissal list, and his file says his mother is the primary contact. I would need to call her for authorization." No, Victoria snapped, forgetting her act for a split second before dialing it back. "I mean, please do not call her. She is unstable. She might do something rash. I am his grandmother. I am the matriarch of the family. Surely you know who we are. We donated the new library wing last year. She was playing the status card. She was banking on the fact that in this town the name Sterling used to open every door." Mrs. Gable hesitated. She looked at the donor plaque on the wall. She looked at the distraught woman in front of her. Manipulation is a powerful drug, and Victoria was dealing a heavy dose. "I suppose, if it is an emergency," Mrs. Gable said, reaching for the intercom. "I can call him down, but you will have to sign him out." "Thank you." Victoria breathed a sigh of relief that sounded more like a hiss. "You are doing the right thing." I stood by the door watching. I could have stepped in then. I could have stopped it. But I needed the final piece of evidence. I needed to know if the poison had reached Leo. I needed to see whose son he really was. A few minutes later, the door to the inner hallway opened. Leo walked out with his backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked small in his uniform, his eyes scanning the room. When he saw Victoria, his step faltered. He didn't run to her. He didn't smile. He stopped dead in his tracks. "Leo, my darling," Victoria cried, opening her arms wide. "Oh, thank God you are safe. Come to Grandma. We are going to go get ice cream. We are going to go to a nice hotel." Leo didn't move. He gripped the straps of his backpack so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked at the woman who had clapped while his father hit his mother. Mrs. Gable looked confused. "Leo, honey, go with your grandmother. She is here to take you home." Leo took a step back. "No," he said. His voice was quiet but firm. Victoria's smile faltered. "Leo, don't be silly. Mommy is sick. She can't take care of you right now. Grandma is here to help. Come on now, the taxi is waiting." "I am not going with you," Leo said louder this time. Victoria's patience snapped. She lunged forward, grabbing his arm. "You are coming with me, young man. Stop making a scene." Leo yanked his arm away with a strength that surprised her. "No!" he shouted. "You are a liar." The office went silent. Mrs. Gable stood up, alarmed. "Leo," Victoria hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper, "you get in that car right now, or I promise you your father will hear about this." "I don't care," Leo yelled, staring her right in the eyes. I saw you laughing." Victoria froze. "What?" "At the dinner," Leo said, his voice trembling with the weight of the truth. "When Daddy hit Mommy, you didn't stop him. You clapped. You laughed. You said it was good." Mrs. Gable gasped, covering her mouth. She looked at Victoria with horror. "That is a lie." Victoria shrieked, looking around the room, seeing the judgment in the secretary's eyes. "He is making it up. His mother brainwashed him. She poisoned his mind against us. He is a child." "Victoria," I said, stepping into the room. "And children don't have the capacity to invent that kind of cruelty. That takes an adult like you." Victoria spun around. She saw me standing there in my thrift store jacket, leaning against the doorframe. "You," she spat, "you are kidnapping him. You are keeping him from his family." I walked over to Leo. I didn't grab him. I didn't pull him. I just stood next to him. I put a hand on his shoulder and he leaned into my leg immediately. He buried his face in my coat, seeking safety. "He is with his family, Victoria," I said. "He is with the people who protect him. not the ones who applaud his pain. Victoria's face twisted into an ugly mask of rage. I am taking him. I have rights. I am his grandmother. You have no legal standing here, old man. I will call the police and tell them you are stealing him. She reached for Leo again, her long fingernails looking like talons. Mrs. Sterling. The voice came from the corner of the room, smooth, deep, and authoritative. Mr. Vance stepped out from the shadows where he had been waiting. He was wearing a navy blue suit that cost more than Victoria's entire outfit. He held a manila folder in his hand. Who are you? Victoria demanded, backing away. I am Eli Bennett's attorney, Vance said, walking forward and placing the folder on the counter between Victoria and Mrs. Gable. And this is a temporary restraining order signed by Judge Hatcher 20 minutes ago. Victoria stared at the folder. A restraining order. Against who? Against you, Vance said calmly, and your son. It forbids you from coming within 500 feet of Maya Bennett, Leo Sterling, or their current residence. It also suspends all visitation rights pending a full custody hearing. On what grounds? Victoria screamed. Oh, this is harassment. You have no proof of anything? Actually, Vance said, tapping the folder, we have quite a bit of proof. Specifically, we have the high-definition security footage from the dining room of your estate. My client, Mr. Bennett, purchased the rights to the footage from the security company last night. Victoria went pale. She had forgotten about the cameras. She had forgotten that in her own home, every corner was monitored. The judge found the footage quite disturbing, Vance continued, especially the part where you encouraged your son to engage in domestic violence. He granted the order immediately. Mrs. Gable has a copy now. If you do not leave the premises in the next 2 minutes, the school is legally obligated to call the police and have you arrested for violating a court order. Victoria looked at Mrs. Gable. The secretary was holding the court order, looking at Victoria with pure disgust. Please leave, Mrs. Sterling, Mrs. Gable said, her voice icy. Or I will press the panic button. Victoria looked at me. She looked at Vance. And finally she looked at Leo. You ungrateful little brat, she hissed at an 8-year-old boy. After everything I bought you, after everything I gave you, you chose them. You chose these nobodies. Leo looked up at her. He didn't cry. He looked her dead in the eye with the same steel gaze I had seen in his mother the night before. You didn't give me anything, Leo said. You just bought things. Grandpa Eli gives me safe. That broke her. Not because she felt guilty, but because she realized she had lost. Her money, her status, her manipulation, it all bounced off the shield of a child's simple truth. She scoffed, pulling her coat tight around her. Fine. Keep him. He is weak just like his mother. I don't want him anyway. She turned on her heel and marched out of the office. She tried to walk with dignity, but we all saw the truth. She was fleeing. She was running away from the wreckage she had caused. When the door closed behind her, the silence in the room was heavy. Mrs. Gable let out a long breath. Mr. Bennett, she said, looking at me. I had no idea. She seemed so convincing. Predators always do, ma'am, I said. That is how they hunt. I knelt down next to Leo. He was shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. You did good, champ, I whispered. You were brave. Braver than most men I know. Leo looked at me, his eyes filled with tears. Is she gone, Grandpa? Is she really gone? Yeah, I said, pulling him into a hug. She is gone, and she isn't coming back. Mr. Vance nodded at me. I will file the permanent custody petition tomorrow, Eli. With the footage and the incident today, she won't get within a mile of this boy again. Thank you, Silas, I said, using his first name. I took Leo's hand. We walked out of the school and into the afternoon sun. The air felt cleaner. The threat was gone. Victoria had tried to play a mind game. She tried to use fear and guilt to break a little boy. But she forgot one thing. Leo Bennett Sterling had Bennett blood running through his veins. And Bennetts don't break. We got into the car. Can we get ice cream? Grandpa Leo asked, wiping his eyes. I smiled, starting the engine. We can get anything you want, Leo. But first, let's go pick up your mom. She is going to want to hear about how you defended the castle. As we drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. The yellow taxi was gone. Victoria was gone. But the war wasn't over. She had tried to take my grandson. Now I was going to take the only thing she had left, her reputation. She thought she could shame us on the internet. She was about to learn that in the court of public opinion, the truth is the ultimate weapon. And I had the receipts. The rats were turning on each other. It is a law of nature that applies to the animal kingdom and to the Sterling family alike. When the ship is sinking, the first thing the heavy cargo does is try to throw the lighter cargo overboard. I knew that Preston would eventually turn to his mother for help. He had spent his entire life hiding behind her skirt, letting her fight his battles and clean up his messes. He assumed that because she had applauded his cruelty, she would also bankroll his defense. He was wrong. It was Wednesday evening. The sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows that looked like prison bars across the pavement. Preston was sitting on a park bench in a secluded corner of the botanical gardens. He looked like a ghost of the man he was 3 days ago. His suit was stained. He hadn't shaved. He was nervously tapping his foot, waiting. I wasn't there physically, but my eyes were everywhere. Silas had a long-range listening device pointed at that bench from a van parked 200 yards away. I sat in my loft listening to the audio feed through my headphones, sipping my tea. I wanted to hear the sound of the cord being cut. Victoria arrived 10 minutes late. She walked quickly, wearing a scarf over her head and dark glasses, trying to avoid being recognized. The restraining order and the public humiliation at the school had made her paranoid. She didn't hug her son. She didn't ask if he was okay. She sat on the far end of the bench, putting as much distance between them as possible. "You look terrible," Victoria said. Her voice was sharp, devoid of warmth. "I have been sleeping in a motel by the airport," Preston snapped. His voice was hoarse. "A motel mom, with roaches. I have no cash. My cards are dead. The locks on the house are changed. I need help." Victoria adjusted her sunglasses. "Well, what do you expect me to do about it? You are the one who let that old truck driver outsmart you. I told you years ago to get better lawyers. I told you to secure the assets in my name. But you didn't listen." Preston turned to her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I didn't listen," he asked, his voice rising. "You are the one who told me to treat Eli like dirt. You are the one who told me to put Maya in her place. I did everything you said, Mom. And now I am facing felony charges. I need money for a defense attorney. A real one. Not the court-appointed garbage they are going to give me." "How much?" Victoria asked coldly. Preston hesitated. He ran a hand through his greasy hair. "Gorski said he needs a $50,000 retainer, and I need another $10,000 for living expenses until I can get access to the offshore accounts again." Victoria laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound like dead leaves crunching underfoot. $60,000. She scoffed. "You want me to write you a check for $60,000 because you couldn't handle your wife?" "It is a loan," Preston pleaded. "I will pay you back as soon as I sue Maya and get the company back." "You are not getting the company back, Preston," Victoria said, looking straight ahead. "I spoke to my broker this morning. The word on the street is that Bennett Holdings has already initiated a hostile takeover. The stock is worthless. Your reputation is radioactive. Even if you win in court, you are finished in this town." Preston stared at her. The reality was sinking in, but he refused to accept it. "So what? You are just going to let me go to jail? You are worth millions. Mom, Dad left you a fortune. 60 grand is nothing to you." Victoria stood up, smoothing her coat. "That money," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "is for my security. It is for my retirement. It is to ensure that I maintain my standard of living, regardless of your incompetence. I am not going to drain my accounts to pay for your stupidity, Preston. If I give you money now, the lawyers will just take it and you will still end up in prison. It is a bad investment." "A bad investment," Preston whispered. He stood up, his hands shaking. "I am your son, and you are a disappointment," Victoria spat. "You let them win, Preston. You let that family humiliate us. I cannot be associated with a loser. It ruins my brand. Figure it out yourself." She turned to walk away. Preston lunged, grabbing her arm. "Mom, please, I have nowhere to go. Don't touch me," she shrieked, pulling away as if he were a beggar on the street. "Do not touch me. You made this mess. You clean it up." She marched away, walking fast toward her car, leaving her only child standing alone in the gathering dark. I sat in my loft and took a slow sip of tea. It was a brutal scene. A mother abandoning her cub because he could no longer hunt. But what made it truly rich, what made it truly ironic, was something neither of them knew. Victoria Sterling bragged about her money. She bragged about the fortune her husband Harrison Sterling had left her. She called it old money. She acted as if they were American royalty. But I knew the truth. 30 years ago, Harrison Sterling was not a tycoon. He was a desperate man standing on the edge of bankruptcy. His manufacturing plant was drowning in debt. He had made bad bets. He had borrowed from the wrong people. He was days away from losing everything, including the very house Victoria lived in now. I was younger then. I was just starting to build my logistics empire. I needed warehouses. Harrison had warehouses. He came to me. Not to my face, of course. He wouldn't deign to do business with a black man from Detroit directly. He went through intermediaries. He begged for a bailout. He begged for a silent partner to inject capital so he could save face, so he could keep up appearances for his socialite wife, Victoria. I bought his debt. I saved his company. I did it quietly through a shell corporation called Phoenix Trust. I let Harrison keep his name on the door. I let him pretend he was the genius who turned it around. Every dollar Victoria spent on her furs, every dollar she put into that retirement account she was hoarding, so greedily came from the profits of the deal I structured. She was standing on a pedestal that I built. She looked down on me at that dinner table. She called me a charity case. She mocked my daughter's heritage. And yet the very shoes she walked in, the car she drove away, and the money she was refusing to give her desperate son, it all came from me. I pulled a file from my desk drawer. It was old, yellowed with age. It was the original promissory note signed by Harrison Sterling. It contained a clause I had never exercised because Harrison had been polite enough to die before he annoyed me. It was a callback provision. It stated that in the event of gross mismanagement or reputational damage to the Sterling name, the silent partner had the right to call in the original principal plus 30 years of interest. Victoria thought she was protecting her nest egg. She didn't realize that egg was rotten. I picked up my phone. I dialed Silas, who was still in the van watching Preston cry on the park bench. "Did you get that?" I asked. "Loud and clear," Silas replied. "She left him high and dry, boss." "Good," I said. "She just severed the last tie. She proved she has no loyalty, which means I have no reason to show mercy." "What is the next move?" Silas asked. "The next move is a history lesson," I said, running my finger over Harrison Sterling's signature. "Victoria thinks that money is hers. She thinks she is independent. Tomorrow morning I want you to file the lien." "The lien on what?" "The lien on the Sterling Family Trust," I said. "Activate the callback clause from 1994. It is time she learned who actually paid for her lifestyle." I hung up the phone. I looked at the photo of Maya and Leo on my mantelpiece. Preston was broke and alone. Victoria was about to find out that she was living in a house of cards that belonged to the man she hated most. They had underestimated me because I was quiet. They thought power had to be loud. They thought power had to be flashy. They didn't understand that real power is having the deed to your enemy's life locked in a safe deposit box for 3 decades, just waiting for the right moment to turn the key. Preston had just learned he had no mother. Tomorrow, Victoria was going to learn she had no money, and the checkmate was getting closer with every move. I closed the file. The crack in their armor wasn't just a crack anymore. It was a canyon, and I was about to push them both into it. The morning sun was struggling to push through the heavy velvet curtains of my study. It was a room I rarely opened, a sanctuary of dust and memories that I had kept locked for nearly 2 decades. But in the chaos of the extraction and the rush to get Leo his medication, I had left the heavy oak door slightly ajar. I should have known that Maya would find it. She has always been a seeker of truth, a quality that made her a brilliant coder and a terrible liar. I walked down the hallway carrying a tray of toast and orange juice, intending to wake her up. But her bedroom door was open and the bed was empty. I heard the rustling of paper coming from the end of the hall. My heart gave a heavy thud. I knew what was in that room. I knew that once she saw what was inside, the carefully constructed fiction of Elijah Bennett, the simple truck driver, would be dismantled forever. I pushed the door open. Maya was sitting on the floor, surrounded by open cardboard boxes. The air smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco, the scent of a life I had left behind. She was holding a framed photograph in her hands, staring at it with an intensity that frightened me. It was a black and white picture taken in 1985. It showed a younger man standing on a loading dock shaking hands with the governor of Michigan. Behind them was a fleet of 300 semi-trucks, all emblazoned with the logo Bennett Logistics. The man in the photo was me, but not the me Maya knew. This man was wearing a 3-piece Italian suit. He looked dangerous. He looked powerful. Maya looked up as I entered. Her face was pale. She didn't look at the toast. She held up the photo. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What is this Bennett Logistics? I thought you told me you drove trucks for them. You told me you were just a driver." I set the tray down on the desk, pushing aside a stack of ledgers. I sat down in the leather chair that groaned under my weight. "I did drive trucks, Maya," I said softly. "In the beginning. I drove them. I loaded them. I fixed the engines when they broke down in the snow. But then I bought a second truck, then a third. And by the time you were born, I owned the fleet." Maya stood up, navigating through the sea of documents scattered on the floor. She picked up a magazine from 1992. It was a trade publication. My face was on the cover. The headline read, "The King of the Midwest, How Eli Bennett Built an Empire on Asphalt. You were the CEO," she said, reading the text. "It says here you controlled 40% of the shipping routes in the tri-state area. It says you were worth—" She stopped, unable to say the number. "It says you were worth $50 million in 1992. She looked at me, betrayal warring with confusion in her eyes. "We lived in a 3-bedroom ranch house, Dad. We drove used cars. I wore hand-me-downs. I remember when I wanted that computer for college, the expensive one for coding. You told me we couldn't afford it. You told me I had to work at the diner to save up for half of it." I closed my eyes, remembering the look on her teenage face when I told her no. It had broken my heart then, just as it was breaking my heart now. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street below. "Do you know what happened to men like me in Detroit back then, Maya?" I asked. "Do you know what happened to black men who made too much money too fast?" She was silent, waiting. "We became targets," I said, turning to face her. "Not just from the criminals, but from the competition, from the corrupt unions, from the politicians who wanted a cut. In 1989, my partner Silas's brother was kidnapped because someone thought he had access to the payroll safe. They found him 3 days later in the trunk of a car." Maya gasped, covering her mouth. I looked at Leo sleeping in the other room. "I wanted to give you a life, Maya, but I also wanted to keep you alive. If people knew who I really was, if they knew how much money was sitting in those accounts, you would have been a target every day of your life. You wouldn't have been Maya the smart girl. You would have been Maya the hostage. Or Maya the spoiled princess." I walked over to her and took the magazine from her hands. "So I sold the public face of the company. I took it private. I hid the assets in holding companies and blind trusts. I put on my work boots, I bought a used Ford, and I became Eli the truck driver. Because no one looks twice at a truck driver. No one tries to kidnap a truck driver's daughter." Maya sat back down on the floor, surrounded by the evidence of my deception. Tears were streaming down her face now. "But it wasn't just safety, Dad," she said, her voice cracking. "You watched me struggle. You watched me work double shifts at the library. You watched Preston. You watched him mock you. Last night he called you a charity case. He humiliated you, and you just sat there. You let him treat you like dirt. Why? Why didn't you tell him? Because a lion doesn't need to roar to know he is a lion," I said. "Preston's power comes from his credit card. Mine comes from knowing I can buy and sell him before he finishes his drink. I didn't need his respect, Maya. I needed his true character. And last night he showed us exactly who he is." Maya picked up another document. It was a letter on thick, cream-colored stationery. It was dated 10 years ago. It was a notification from the Future Innovator Scholarship Fund informing Maya Bennett that she had been awarded a full ride to the University of Chicago. "I remember this," she whispered, a sad smile touching her lips. "This changed my life. I thought I won this because of my essay." "You did win it because of your essay," I said, quickly kneeling beside her. "You were brilliant, Maya. You were the smartest kid in that state." "But I checked the donor list," she said, looking at me with piercing clarity. "The fund was anonymous. It was established the same year I applied." She looked at me, waiting for the confirmation. "It was you, wasn't it?" I sighed. I couldn't lie to her anymore. The walls were down. I set up the fund, I admitted. But I made the board blind. I told them to pick the best candidate. If you weren't good enough, you wouldn't have gotten it. I just made sure the door was there. You were the one who walked through it." "And my internship?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "At Cyberdyne Systems, the one that launched my career. I knew the CEO." I shrugged. "I might have made a phone call. I might have asked him to look at your resume, but you kept that job, Maya. You wrote the code. You earned every promotion. I just leveled the playing field." Maya dropped the letter. She buried her face in her hands and began to sob. It wasn't the polite, quiet crying of a society wife. It was the deep, gut-wrenching sobs of a daughter who realizes she has been loved more fiercely than she ever comprehended. I felt so guilty, she choked out. I felt so guilty for being ashamed of you. At the parties, when Preston would make jokes about your old car, I didn't say anything. I was embarrassed. I wanted to fit in with them. I wanted to be a Sterling. And all this time, you were the king. You were the king, and you let me treat you like a pauper. I pulled her into my arms. I held her tight, rocking her like I did when she was a baby. You were never ashamed of me, Maya, I said, stroking her hair. You were just trying to survive in a world that tells you that money is the only thing that matters. You were protecting me too in your own way. You didn't want Preston to hurt me. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. He hurt me, Dad. He broke me. He made me think I was nothing without him. I reached into the box and pulled out one final document. It was a leather-bound folder. Inside were the articles of incorporation for a new company. The date was from last week. The name of the company was Phoenix Tech. He didn't break you, I said, handing her the folder. He just woke you up. She opened the folder. She read the names on the board of directors. Her eyes widened. This is Preston's competition, she said. This is the company that has been eating his market share. It is a subsidiary of Bennett Holdings, I said. And do you know who the CEO is? She looked at the bottom of the page. The name listed as Chief Executive Officer was blank. I have been saving that seat, I said. For someone who knows the code. For someone who knows the product better than Preston ever did. For someone who learned how to work hard because her father didn't hand her everything on a silver platter. Maya looked at the blank line. She looked at me. The fear in her eyes was fading, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years. Ambition. Fire. You want me to run it? She asked. I don't want you to run it, I said, standing up and offering her my hand. I want you to use it to destroy him. Preston thinks he is a tech genius. But we both know you were the brains. He has the suit. You have the talent. And now you have the bankroll. Maya took my hand. She stood up. She looked at the photo of me on the loading dock one last time. Then she looked at the reflection of herself in the window. She smoothed her hair. She straightened her spine. He took my code, she said, her voice hardening. He took my IP. He claimed he wrote the algorithm for the new interface. Then let's go get it back, I said. She nodded. A slow, dangerous nod. I don't want toast, Dad, she said, walking toward the bathroom to wash her face. I want coffee. Black. We have work to do. I watched her walk away. The battered wife was gone. The daughter of Eli Bennett had returned. I looked at the old photo of myself and winked. Preston Sterling had a shareholder meeting at noon today. He was planning to sell off the intellectual property to save his skin. He thought he was walking into a boardroom to beg for money. He didn't know he was walking into an ambush. And the new CEO wasn't just coming for his job, she was coming for his throat. The boardroom on the 45th floor of the Sterling Technologies building was a shark tank designed by an architect who hated comfort. It was all glass and chrome with a table made of a single slab of black marble that cost more than the house I grew up in. The air conditioning was humming a low, aggressive sound that did little to dry the sweat on Preston Sterling's forehead. I was not in the room yet. I was standing in the corridor waiting for my cue. Through the frosted glass walls, I could see the silhouettes of the 12 board members. They were vultures in expensive suits, circling a dying animal. And Preston was the carcass. He had called this emergency meeting at 8 in the morning, desperate to liquefy the only asset he had left. He was trying to sell Project Aurora. It was a predictive logistics algorithm that could revolutionize the shipping industry. He was pitching it as his life's work. He was telling them he wrote the code in his garage. He was telling them it was his intellectual property. But I knew the truth. I watched Maya write that code at our kitchen table over 3 Christmases. I watched her debug it while nursing Leo. Project Aurora belonged to my daughter, and Preston was trying to sell it for pennies on the dollar just to pay his legal fees and keep his Ferrari from being auctioned off. I checked my reflection in the glass door. I was not wearing a tuxedo. I was not wearing a power suit. I was wearing my old faded leather jacket, the one with the grease stain on the elbow from fixing transmission lines in 1982. I wore my work boots, scuffed and worn. I looked exactly like what Preston thought I was. A nobody, a relic, a piece of trash from the wrong side of the tracks. I pushed the heavy double doors open. They didn't slam. They glided open on silent hinges, but the effect was the same. Every head in the room turned. Preston was standing at the head of the table, pointing at a projection screen filled with stolen data. When he saw me, his face went through a spasm of emotions. Confusion, then recognition, then pure, unadulterated rage. "What are you doing here?" Preston barked, dropping his laser pointer. "This is a closed meeting. Security? Where's the damn security?" I didn't say a word. I just walked into the room. My boots made a heavy thudding sound on the plush carpet, a stark contrast to the quiet Italian loafers of the board members. I walked slowly. I looked at the faces around the table. Most of them looked confused. They saw an old black man in work clothes crashing a high-level corporate negotiation. They looked at their watches, wondering how security had lapsed. But there were 3 men at the table who did not look confused. Mr. Henderson, the banker, Frank, the pension fund manager, and Arthur Weiss, the chairman of the board. These men didn't look at my clothes, they looked at my eyes. They knew who I was. They knew that the man in the leather jacket had signed the checks that built their careers. Preston, however, was too blind to see the tension in the room. He marched over to me, stopping just inches from my face. He smelled of breath mints and fear. "Are you deaf, old man?" he hissed. "I said get out. Did you come here to beg? Did Maya send you to plead for money? Tell her the bank is closed. Tell her I am selling her little science project to the highest bidder and she won't see a dime." I looked at him. I looked at the sweat staining his collar. "I didn't come to beg, Preston," I said, my voice calm and gravelly. "And I didn't come to deliver a message. I came to take a seat." Preston laughed. It was a manic, high-pitched sound. "A seat? You want a seat? You are a truck driver. Eli, you fix engines. You don't sit at marble tables. You are the help. Now get out before I have you thrown out." He turned to the room, looking for validation. "Can someone please call the lobby? This is insane. This man is trespassing. He is senile. He thinks he belongs here." Preston looked at Arthur Weiss, the chairman. Arthur was a man of few words, a man who had survived corporate raids in the 80s that would make Preston weep. Arthur was sitting at the far end of the table, his fingers steeped together. "Arthur," Preston shouted, "call security. Get this garbage out of my boardroom." Arthur Weiss stood up slowly. He adjusted his silk tie. He looked at Preston with a look of profound pity. Then he looked at me. Arthur didn't reach for the phone. He didn't call security. Instead, he bowed. It wasn't a nod. It was a formal, respectful bow of the head, the kind a soldier gives to a general. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," Arthur said, his voice clear and respectful. "We have been waiting for you." Preston froze. He looked at Arthur, then back at me. "Mr. Bennett." Preston stammered. "What are you talking about, Arthur?" "His name is Eli. He drives a Ford." Arthur ignored him. He gestured to the empty chair at the head of the table. The chair Preston had just vacated. "Your seat is ready, sir," Arthur said. The room fell dead silent. You could hear the hum of the projector fan. The other board members, those who didn't know, were looking back and forth, trying to calculate the shift in power. Preston's face drained of color. He looked like he was having a stroke. "What seat?" Preston whispered. "That is my seat. I am the CEO. I am the founder." Arthur shook his head slowly. "You are the public face," Arthur said coldly. "You are the mascot. But the company, the capital, the infrastructure, that has never been yours." Arthur picked up a thick binder from the table. He opened it to the first page. "Sterling Technologies is a wholly owned subsidiary of Phoenix Trust," Arthur read aloud. "And Phoenix Trust is the investment arm of the Midwest Logistics Union Pension Fund." Preston blinked, trying to process the words. So what? It's a pension fund. I know that. I took their money." Arthur turned the page. "And the sole administrator of Phoenix Trust, the man who holds 51% of the voting stock in this company and the man who has the unilateral power to hire and fire the CEO, is the founder of the fund." Arthur pointed a manicured finger at me. "Mr. Elijah Bennett." Preston turned to me. His eyes were wide, terrified. He looked at my old leather jacket. He looked at my work boots. He looked at the calluses on my hands. "No," he whispered. "That is impossible. You are nobody. You live in a loft. You drink cheap coffee. You are a lie. I am the truth." "Preston," I said, stepping forward. I walked past him. I didn't shove him. I didn't have to. He shrank away from me, instinctively making himself small. I walked to the head of the table. I placed my hands on the black marble. It felt cold and solid. I looked out at the faces of the men and women who ran my empire. "Gentlemen and ladies," I said, my voice filling the room. "My apologies for the interruption, but I was informed that there was an attempt to sell assets that do not belong to this company." I looked at the screen where Project Aurora was displayed. "That code," I said, pointing at the projection, "does not belong to Sterling Technologies. It belongs to Maya Bennett. It was created on her personal time on her personal equipment, and I have the timestamps to prove it." I looked at Preston. He was trembling now, leaning against the wall for support. "Preston," I said, "you called me a charity case. You said I didn't understand the value of things." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a quarter, a simple 25-cent coin. I tossed it onto the marble table. It spun loudly, ringing like a bell before settling in front of him. "That is your severance package," I said. Preston looked at the coin. "You can't do this," he choked out. "I have a contract. I have a golden parachute." Arthur Weiss cleared his throat. Clause 4, Section B. Arthur recited the same clause Silas had used the night before. "The morals clause. You assaulted the daughter of the majority shareholder. Your contract is void. Your golden parachute has been cut." Preston looked around the room one last time. He looked for an ally, but the vultures had aligned with the new alpha. They were all looking at me. "Get out," I said softly. Preston didn't move. He couldn't move. His reality had shattered. I said, "Get out," I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. The sound made everyone jump. Preston scrambled toward the door. He tripped over his own feet, stumbling into the hallway. He didn't look back. He ran. He ran like the coward he was, leaving his dignity and his future on the boardroom floor. I watched the doors swing shut behind him. I took a deep breath. I unzipped my leather jacket and sat down in the leather chair at the head of the table. It was comfortable. Arthur sat down. Frank sat down. Mr. Henderson sat down. "So, Mr. Bennett," Arthur said, opening his notebook, "now that the trash has been taken out, what is the first order of business?" I looked at the screen where Maya's code was still glowing. "First order of business," I said. "Change the name of the company. Sterling Technologies is dead." "What do we call it?" Frank asked. I smiled. "Call it Maya," I said. "And get me a coffee. Black. We have a lot of work to do." The ambush was complete. The trap had sprung. Preston was out on the street with a quarter in his pocket, and I was sitting at the controls of the machine he thought he had built. But I wasn't doing this for the power. I was doing it to clear the path. The throne was empty now, and the queen was ready to take her place. The leather chair at the head of the table groaned softly as I settled my weight into it. It was a sound of authority, a sound that had been absent from this room for far too long. For 5 years, this seat had been occupied by a boy playing dress-up. A boy who thought that shouting made him a leader and spending money made him a visionary. But now the boy was standing by the door trembling, and the man had returned to clean up the mess. I looked down the long expanse of black marble. The board members were silent. They were waiting. They knew that the transfer of power had just happened in the blink of an eye. They looked at me with respect, yes, but also with fear. They knew that Elijah Bennett did not tolerate incompetence, and they were wondering if they were next on the chopping block. But my eyes were fixed on Preston. He was standing near the exit, his hand on the door handle, but he couldn't leave. He was frozen by the sheer magnitude of his own destruction. He looked back at me, his eyes wide and wet. He looked like a deer that had been shot, but hadn't realized it was dead yet. "Sit down, Preston," I said. My voice was not loud. It was the low rumble of a diesel engine idling. Preston shook his head. "No," he whispered. You can't tell me what to do. I am the CEO. You are a suspect," I corrected him. "And if you walk out that door right now without signing the release papers, the security team waiting in the hall will detain you for corporate espionage. So I suggest you sit down." Preston hesitated. He looked at Arthur Weiss, the chairman. Arthur didn't even look up from his notes. Preston realized he was alone. Slowly, painfully, he walked back to the table. He didn't sit in the head chair. He sat in the small folding chair near the wall, the one reserved for junior assistants. It was a fitting demotion. I reached into the inside pocket of my leather jacket. I pulled out a thick manila envelope. It was heavy. It was filled with the work of 3 forensic accountants who had been up all night analyzing the digital trail Preston thought he had erased. I tossed the file onto the marble table. It landed with a heavy thud that echoed in the silent room. It slid across the polished surface, stopping exactly in front of Arthur Weiss. "Read the first page, Arthur," I said, out loud, so the former CEO can hear it. Arthur opened the file. He adjusted his glasses. He scanned the columns of numbers, his eyebrows shooting up in surprise. "These are expense reports," Arthur said, "from the discretionary fund." "Keep reading," I said, leaning back and crossing my arms. Arthur cleared his throat. Item 1. Arthur read. May 14th. Hermes Boutique, Chicago. $12,000. Listed as client appreciation gift. Preston shifted in his chair. That was for a potential investor," he stammered. "A lady from a venture capital firm. You have to spend money to make money, Eli. You wouldn't understand high-level networking." I looked at him. The recipient of that bag was not an investor, Preston. It was Victoria Sterling. "Your mother. I have the shipping manifest. You used company funds to buy your mother a purse that costs more than my car," the board members murmured. Using investor money for personal gifts was not just unethical, it was illegal. It was embezzlement. "But that is just the appetizer," I said. "Read the next item, Arthur." Arthur turned the page. His face hardened. Item 2 through 50, Arthur read. Recurring payments. Monthly rent for a penthouse apartment in the West Loop. $4,000 a month. Listed as remote office space. Preston turned pale. He started to sweat profusely. That is a satellite office," Preston shouted. "For off-site meetings, we needed a quiet place to code." I leaned forward. "I visited that satellite office this morning. Preston, it has a very nice view. It also has a closet full of lingerie that does not belong to my daughter. And the tenant on the lease is not Sterling Technologies, it is Jessica Miller." The room gasped. Everyone knew Jessica. She was the 22-year-old marketing intern Preston had hired 6 months ago. The girl he claimed was a prodigy. The girl who was always in his office with the door closed. "You are paying for your mistress's apartment with the pension fund of retired truck drivers," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Men who worked 30 years with bad backs and busted knees. You took their money. You took the money meant for their medicine and their heating bills, and you used it to play house with a girl half your age while your wife was at home raising your son." Preston stood up. "That is a lie. Jessica is a consultant. This is slander. I will sue you." Arthur Weiss slammed the file shut. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling." Arthur barked. "This is not slander. These are bank statements. This is wire fraud." Preston collapsed back into the chair. He put his head in his hands. I stood up. I walked around the table slowly. My boots clicked on the floor. I stopped right behind Preston. I could smell his fear. It smelled like sour sweat and expensive cologne. "You thought you were untouchable," I said, looking down at the back of his neck. "You thought because you wore a suit and I wore a jacket that you were the king and I was the peasant. You laughed at me at dinner. You mocked my life. You hit my daughter because you thought she had no one to defend her." I placed a hand on his shoulder. He flinched as if I had burned him. "But here is the lesson, Preston. The lesson I tried to teach you 5 years ago when I let you marry her." I leaned down close to his ear. "You don't bite the hand that feeds you, son. Especially when that hand is the only thing holding you up from the abyss." I squeezed his shoulder hard. I felt his collarbone grinding under my grip. "You are fired," I said. "Effective immediately." Preston looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. But the company. I built this. It is my name on the door." I straightened up. "We are taking your name off the door," I said. "And we are taking everything else too. The apartment is gone, the car is gone, the salary is gone, and Arthur has already called the SEC. They are very interested in your creative accounting." Preston looked at the board members. Arthur Frank. "Help me. You can't let him do this." Arthur looked away. Frank stared at the ceiling. They were businessmen. They knew a corpse when they saw one. "Security," I called out. The doors opened. 2 large men in gray uniforms walked in. They weren't the polite lobby guards. They were my guys, men from the union, men who knew exactly what Preston had done to my daughter. "Escort Mr. Sterling to the curb," I ordered. Do not let him return to his office. Do not let him touch a computer. Give him a cardboard box for his personal effects, if he has any personal effects left that he actually paid for. The guards grabbed Preston by the arms. He tried to shake them off, but he was weak. He was a man made of paper, and the wind had finally blown him over. "You can't do this," Preston screamed as they dragged him toward the door. "I am the CEO. I am Preston Sterling." "You are nobody," I shouted back, my voice finally rising to a roar that shook the glass walls. "You are a thief. You are a wife-beater, and now you are unemployed." They dragged him into the hallway. His shoes squeaked on the floor. His protests faded as the elevator doors closed. The silence returned to the boardroom. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath. My heart was pounding, but it was a good pounding. It was the rhythm of justice. I looked at the empty chair where Preston had sat. I looked at the file on the table filled with the evidence of his greed. He had bought a purse for his mother while my grandson didn't have an inhaler. He had paid rent for a mistress while my daughter was humiliated in her own home. I picked up the file. I handed it to Arthur. "Send this to the district attorney," I said quietly. "And send a copy to his mother. Let her see exactly where her son's loyalty lies. Let her see that the money she refused to lend him was spent on another woman." Arthur nodded, taking the file with both hands. "Consider it done, Mr. Bennett." I walked back to the head of the table. I sat down again. I looked out the window at the city skyline. Somewhere down there, Preston was standing on the sidewalk holding a box of desk toys, realizing that his life was over. But mine was just beginning. I had taken back the crown. Not for myself, but for Maya. I turned to the board. Now I said, "Let's talk about the future. And let's talk about how we are going to rebuild this company into something decent, something honest, something my daughter can be proud of." The meeting began, and for the first time in 5 years, the air in the room was clean. The rain that night was torrential, a relentless sheet of water that hammered against the skylights of my loft, like gravel being dumped from a truck bed. It was 2 a.m. The city of Detroit was asleep, or as asleep as this restless industrial beast ever gets. Inside the loft, the air was warm and smelled of lavender from the candle Maya had burned earlier to calm her nerves. She and Leo were asleep in the back rooms, finally finding some peace after the storm of the last few days. I was awake. I am always awake at 2 a.m. It is an old habit from my days hauling steel across state lines when the only company you have is the white line on the highway and the static on the CB radio. I was sitting in my armchair reading a book on Roman history when the sound came. It was not a knock. It was a collision. Someone was hammering on the heavy steel door of the building entrance 6 floors below. The sound vibrated up through the iron beams of the old structure, a dull, rhythmic thudding that sounded like a heartbeat gone wrong. I closed my book. I did not need to guess who it was. I knew. The buzzer on the intercom wall shrieked, one long, continuous scream. I stood up and walked to the security monitor mounted near the kitchen. The camera feed was grainy in the low light and the rain, but I could see him clearly. Preston. He was soaking wet, his expensive suit clinging to his frame like a second skin. He was swaying back and forth, slamming his fist against the call box. He looked like a drowned rat that had crawled out of the sewer to seek revenge on the exterminator. And then I saw the glint. In his right hand, hanging loosely by his side, was a gun. It looked like a shiny, nickel-plated pistol, the kind of weapon a man buys because it looks good in a movie, not because he knows how to use it. I watched him on the screen. He was screaming something, but the microphone was muffled by the wind. "Dad." I turned around. Maya was standing in the hallway, wrapped in a blanket. Her eyes were wide, terrified. She had heard the buzzer. "Go back to bed, Maya," I said, my voice low and calm. "It is him, isn't it?" she whispered, clutching the blanket tighter. I can hear him yelling. Is he drunk?" "He is desperate," I said. "And desperate men make noise." I walked over to the closet near the door. I put on my coat. "What are you doing?" Maya asked, taking a step forward. "You are not going down there. Call the police, Dad. Please. Call 911. He has gone crazy." I looked at the monitor again. Preston raised the gun and smashed the butt of it against the camera lens. The screen went static. "If I call the police," I said, turning to face her, "they will arrive in 10 minutes. They will see a black man with a gun and they will shoot him. and then Leo will grow up knowing his father was killed on his grandfather's doorstep. I checked my pockets. I did not take a weapon. I did not take a bat. I took only my keys. But he might hurt you, Maya cried, tears springing to her eyes. You can't go out there alone. I walked over to her and kissed her on the forehead. He won't hurt me, honey. He doesn't want to kill me. He wants to be heard. He wants to feel powerful again, and I am going to go down there and take that away from him, too. I locked the door to the loft from the outside. I took the freight elevator down. The gears groaned as the cage descended a slow, mechanical descent into the underworld. I watched the floor numbers light up. 6, 5, 4. I checked my reflection in the metal wall of the elevator. I didn't see a victim. I saw a man who had stared down union busters and mob enforcers in the 80s. I saw a man who had built an empire from asphalt and grit. Preston brought a gun to a knife fight, but he forgot that I was the knife. The elevator hit the ground floor with a clank. I walked across the lobby. The banging on the door had stopped. Now there was just silence and the sound of the rain. I unlocked the heavy deadbolts. 1, 2, 3. I pushed the steel door open. The wind hit me first, carrying the scent of ozone and wet pavement. Preston was standing in the middle of the sidewalk under the yellow glow of the street lamp. He looked pathetic. His hair was plastered to his skull. His shirt was torn. He was shivering violently. When he saw me, he stumbled back. He raised the gun. His hand was shaking so badly the barrel was wavering in circles. "Where is she?" Preston screamed. His voice was raw, shredded by alcohol and rage. "Bring her out! Bring my wife out!" I stepped out onto the sidewalk. I let the door close behind me. I stood in the rain, letting it soak into my jacket. "She is asleep, Preston," I said. "Go home." "I don't have a home," he shouted, stepping closer. "You took it. You took my house. You took my job. You took my money. You took everything." He waved the gun wildly. "I am the CEO. I am a Sterling. You are just a dirty truck driver. How did you do it? How did you ruin me?" I walked toward him, slow, deliberate. I did not flinch at the weapon. "I didn't ruin you, Preston," I said, my voice cutting through the storm. "I just turned on the lights. You ruined yourself. You did it every time you swiped that credit card for something you didn't earn. You did it every time you looked down on people you thought were beneath you." "Shut up!" Preston shrieked. He cocked the hammer of the gun. The click was loud, sharp. "Don't you lecture me, old man. I will kill you. I swear to God, I will kill you. Then I will go up there and take my family back." He was 10 feet away. I could see his eyes. They were bloodshot manic. He was looking for a reason to pull the trigger. He wanted me to beg. He wanted me to be afraid. If I showed fear, he would feel justified. If I begged, he would feel like a king again. I took another step. "Shoot, then," I said. Preston blinked. He looked confused. "What?" I opened my arms, exposing my chest. "Shoot me," I said louder. "Go ahead. Pull the trigger. End it right now." Preston's hand wavered. He gripped the gun with both hands, trying to steady it. I will do it." "Don't test me, Eli." I took another step, 5 feet away. "I am not testing you, son. I am doing the math for you. Because that is the only thing you understand. Math. Numbers. Profit and loss." I looked him dead in the eye. I stared deep into the abyss of his soul. "You think killing me solves your problem? You think if I die, the money comes back, I will inherit it?" Preston yelled. "Maya inherits it, and I control Maya." I laughed. It was a cold, dry laugh that made him flinch. "You really didn't read the fine print, did you?" I took another step. I was close enough to touch the gun now. "When I froze your assets yesterday, Preston, I froze everything. The bank accounts, the credit lines, and the insurance policies." Preston's eyes widened. "What, your life insurance, Preston?" I said. "The $5 million Keyman policy the company held on you, I canceled it this morning. It lapsed at noon." Preston lowered the gun an inch. "And my policy," I continued. "The one you were counting on, I changed the beneficiary years ago. If I die tonight, the money doesn't go to Maya. It goes into a blind trust for Leo managed by a law firm in Zurich. You won't see a penny. Maya won't see a penny until she is 50. I stood right in front of him. The barrel of the gun was inches from my chest. "So go ahead, Preston. Pull the trigger. You kill me, you go to prison for life, and you go broke. You don't kill me, you go to prison for assault, and you go broke." I leaned in my face inches from his. "You are worth nothing, dead Preston." And you are worth nothing alive. The math is the same either way. You lose." Preston stared at me. He looked at the gun in his hand. He looked at the old man standing in the rain who refused to bleed. The reality hit him like a physical blow. He realized that the gun wasn't a scepter of power, it was just a heavy piece of metal. He realized that he couldn't shoot his way out of poverty. He couldn't shoot his way out of irrelevance. His chin began to tremble. A sob ripped from his throat. Why, he whispered, his voice breaking. "Why do you hate me so much?" I reached out. I didn't grab the gun. I gently placed my hand over his hand, the one holding the weapon. "I don't hate you, Preston," I said softly. "I pity you. You had a queen. You had a prince. And you traded them for a reflection in the mirror." Preston's fingers went slack. The gun slipped from his grip. I caught it before it hit the ground. It was heavy, cold, and wet. Preston collapsed. He fell to his knees on the wet pavement, sobbing into his hands. He cried like a child who had lost his mother in a crowd. He cried for the Ferrari. He cried for the penthouse. He cried for the emptiness inside him that no amount of money could ever fill. I ejected the magazine from the gun. I pocketed the clip and slid the empty weapon into my coat pocket. I looked down at him. The rain was washing the gel out of his hair, ruining the last vestige of his perfect image. In the distance, I heard sirens. Maya had called them after all. Or maybe a neighbor had. I reached down and grabbed him by the collar of his ruined suit. I hauled him to his feet. He couldn't stand on his own, so I held him up. "Stand up," I ordered. He looked at me with glazed eyes. "Stand up, Preston. When the police get here, you will be standing. You will not be on your knees. A Bennett does not let his enemy crawl." He nodded, weak and broken. The blue and red lights swept around the corner, illuminating the rain in strobe flashes. The squad car screeched to a halt. Officers spilled out, guns drawn, shouting orders. "Drop the weapon. Hands in the air." I held my empty hands up, palms open. "It is over, officers," I shouted, my voice calm and authoritative. "He is unarmed." Preston didn't move. He just stood there shivering, waiting for someone to tell him what to do. As the officers rushed forward to cuff him, Preston looked at me one last time. "Tell Leo," he stammered. "Tell Leo I was sick. Don't tell him I was bad." I looked at him as the officer shoved him against the hood of the cruiser. "I won't lie to him, Preston," I said. "I will tell him you forgot how to be a father. And maybe one day, if you learn how again, you can tell him yourself." They put him in the back of the car. He looked small through the wire mesh of the window. I watched them drive away. The street was quiet again. The rain kept falling, washing the sidewalk clean. I turned around and walked back to the heavy steel door. I unlocked it and stepped into the warmth of the lobby. I took the elevator back up to the 6th floor. When I opened the door to the loft, Maya was waiting. She ran to me, checking me for bullet holes. "I am fine, honey," I said, taking off my wet coat. "I am fine. Did he shoot?" "No," I said. "He didn't have any bullets." She looked at me confused. "But I saw the gun. He didn't have any bullets in his soul." "Maya," I said, walking to the kitchen to pour a glass of water, "and that is the only ammunition that counts." I sat down in my chair. My hands were steady. I opened my book on Roman history. The chapter I was reading was about the fall of Nero. It seemed appropriate. The king was dead. Long live the queen. There are 2 ways to kill a person in this world. The first is physical. You stop their heart, you stop their breath, and you put them in the ground. That is messy and it is illegal. The second way is social. You do not touch a hair on their head. You simply remove their name from the guest list. You stop their phone from ringing. You make them invisible in the very world they built their identity around. For a woman like Victoria Sterling, social death is a fate far worse than a physical one. If you cut her, she bleeds arrogance. But if you ignore her, she ceases to exist. It was Thursday afternoon, 2 days after I had fired her son and seized his company. Victoria was in full damage control mode. In her mind, the events of the last week were just a temporary embarrassment, a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with expensive champagne and hors d'oeuvres. She believed that her status as the grand dame of Detroit society was a shield that could deflect any scandal. She believed that if she put on her pearls and smiled wide enough, people would forget that she had cheered while her son beat his wife. She decided to host a charity tea. It was an event she had been planning for months, a fundraiser for the city's art museum. She was the chairwoman of the committee. This was supposed to be her moment of triumph. But now it was a desperate attempt to reclaim the narrative. She had sent out urgent reminders. She had hired the best catering company in the city. She had filled her drawing room with fresh orchids that cost $5,000. I knew all of this because I was sitting in a nondescript sedan parked 3 houses down from the Sterling estate. But more importantly, I knew all of this because I had made 5 phone calls that morning. Victoria thought her power came from her husband's money. She forgot that in a city like Detroit, real power lies in the unions, the logistics, and the old favors traded in smoke-filled rooms decades ago. I picked up my thermos of coffee and watched the house. The engine was off and the windows were down, letting in the cool autumn breeze. It was the calm before the storm. It was 2 o'clock, the start time of the event. The driveway was empty. Inside the house, I imagined Victoria was standing in the foyer adjusting her dress, checking her reflection in the mirror. She would be telling the hired waitstaff to be ready with the trays. She would be checking the temperature of the wine. She would be confident. After all, she was Victoria Sterling. Everyone came to her parties. To miss a Sterling event was social suicide, or at least it used to be. 2:15. A delivery truck drove past. It did not stop. The driveway remained empty. By now, the first wave of guests should have arrived. The wives of the bankers, the daughters of the senators, the women who ran the charities. These were women who usually flocked to Victoria like moths to a flame, desperate for her approval. But today, the flame was out. I took a sip of coffee. I remembered the conversation I had earlier that morning with Mrs. Evelyn Cartwright. Evelyn was the wife of the biggest steel magnate in the Midwest. She was the true queen of this city's social circle. Victoria wanted to be Evelyn, but she never quite made the cut. 30 years ago, Evelyn's husband had a problem with a wildcat strike at his main plant. It was going to cost him millions. I stepped in. I negotiated a deal that saved his business and got my men a raise. Evelyn never forgot that. We had an understanding. I called her at 9 in the morning. "Evelyn," I said, "it is Eli Bennett." "Eli," she answered, her voice warm and respectful. "It has been a long time. To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I am calling about the tea at the Sterling house today," I said. "Oh yes, Victoria's little gathering. I was planning to make an appearance." "I wouldn't if I were you, Evelyn," I said. There was a pause on the line. "Why is that, Eli?" "Because," I said, my voice dropping to a serious tone, "Victoria Sterling is not who you think she is. We found evidence of embezzlement. Her son was stealing from the pension fund to buy her gifts. But worse than that, Evelyn, she stood by and laughed while her son assaulted my daughter. She is an abuser by proxy." The silence on the other end was heavy. Evelyn Cartwright had founded 3 shelters for battered women. I knew exactly which button to press. "Is this verified, Eli?" she asked. "I sent the video to your secure email," I said. I heard the clicking of a mouse. A gasp. Then the sound of a woman who had seen enough. "Thank you, Eli," she said. "I will make some calls. The committee does not associate with trash no matter how expensive its dress is." I hung up. That was the only stone I needed to throw. The ripple effect did the rest. Evelyn called the vice chair. The vice chair called the treasurer. By noon, every phone in the high society district was buzzing. The word was out. Victoria Sterling was radioactive. 2:45. The driveway was still empty. I saw the front door of the mansion open. Victoria stepped out onto the porch. She was wearing a cream-colored dress that looked impeccable. She looked left. She looked right. She was scanning the street, looking for the limousines, looking for the town cars. There was nothing. Just a squirrel running across the lawn and my old Ford sedan parked down the block. She pulled her phone out of her pocket. I saw her dialing frantically. She was calling her friends. She was calling the women she had gossiped with for 20 years. I watched her face through my binoculars. She put the phone to her ear. She waited. Then she pulled it away and stared at the screen. Voicemail. She dialed again. Another number. Another voicemail. She was being ghosted by the entire city. Then she did something desperate. She called Evelyn Cartwright. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I knew exactly how it went because Evelyn had texted me 10 minutes ago. She is calling me. Watch this. Victoria held the phone to her ear. She started speaking rapidly, her hands waving in the air. She was probably asking if there was a traffic jam, if there was a mistake with the invitations. Then she stopped moving. She stood frozen on the porch. Her hand slowly lowered the phone. Evelyn had delivered the kill shot. "We know, Victoria. We know about the slap. We know about the theft. Do not call us again." Victoria stood there for a long time. The wind blew her perfectly coiffed hair across her face, but she didn't brush it away. She looked small. For the first time in her life, the grand facade had cracked, and there was nothing behind it but a lonely, bitter old woman. But I wasn't done. A motorcycle turned onto the street. It was a courier service. The rider pulled up to the driveway and walked up the path. Victoria looked at him confused. She probably thought it was a late RSVP. The courier handed her a thick envelope. He asked her to sign. She signed mechanically, her hand shaking. She opened the envelope right there on the porch. It was the file, the same file I had shown Preston in the boardroom, the forensic accounting of his theft. I wanted her to see it. I wanted her to see the receipts for the Hermes bag she was probably holding right now. I wanted her to see the rent checks for the mistress's apartment. I watched her read. I saw her knees buckle. She grabbed the porch railing to steady herself. This was the woman who told her son that $60,000 was a bad investment. This was the woman who refused to help her own flesh and blood because she wanted to protect her retirement. And now she was holding the proof that her retirement fund had been looted by the very son she had spoiled. She dropped the papers. They scattered across the porch steps, fluttering in the wind like dead leaves. She screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure, narcissistic rage. She realized she had been betrayed. She realized she was broke. And she realized that there was no audience left to hear her cry. The catering van pulled up to the house. The driver got out and walked up to her. I saw him gesture to the house, asking if they should start serving the food. Victoria turned on him. She started shouting, waving her arms, pointing at the street. She was firing them. She was telling them to get out. The driver shrugged. He signaled his team. They started carrying the untouched trays of lobster and caviar back to the van. Victoria watched them go. She was alone. I started my car engine. The rumble of the exhaust broke the quiet of the afternoon. Victoria looked up. She saw my car. She saw me sitting in the driver's seat looking at her. Our eyes met across the distance. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just looked at her with the cold indifference of a judge passing a sentence. She knew. In that moment, she knew it was me. She knew that the truck driver she had mocked had stripped her naked in front of the world. She turned and ran back into the house, slamming the heavy door behind her. But doors couldn't keep this out. The silence was already inside with her. The phone would never ring again. The invitations would never come. She would live out the rest of her days in that big, empty house, surrounded by the echoes of a life she didn't deserve. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. Victoria Sterling was dead. She was still breathing, she was still walking, but she was dead. Detroit had buried her, and all it took was a few whispers from a man she thought was beneath her. I drove toward the city. I had one more stop to make. The legal trap was set for Preston, but there was still the matter of the divorce. And Maya needed to be ready for the final battle. Victoria was the past. Maya was the future. And I was the bridge that would carry her across. The sound of a jail cell door sliding shut is a very specific frequency. It is the sound of metal grinding against metal, followed by a heavy mechanical clank that echoes in the marrow of your bones. For a man like Preston Sterling, it was a sound he never expected to hear from the inside. He spent Thursday night in the county lockup. He was still wearing his bespoke suit, but now it was stained with vomit and wrinkled from sleeping on a concrete bench. I was not there to see him wake up, but I know exactly what happened. The hangover would have hit him first, a throbbing headache that felt like a nail being driven into his temple. Then the smell would have hit him. Urine and bleach, the perfume of the corrections system, and finally the realization. He was not in his penthouse. He was not in control. He used his one phone call to dial Marcus Thorne. Thorne was the kind of lawyer who wore three-piece suits and smiled like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. He cost $1,000 an hour, and he was worth every penny if you were a guilty man trying to look innocent. Preston didn't call me. He didn't call his mother because Victoria was currently barricaded in her mansion, hiding from her own social execution. He called the shark because he wanted to bite back. He was released on bail by Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, he was sitting across from us in the conference room of the law firm. The room was cold. It was designed that way. The air conditioning hummed a low, aggressive note. The table was mahogany long and polished to a mirror shine. On one side sat Preston and Thorne. Preston looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot and his hands were shaking slightly, but he tried to mask it with arrogance. He leaned back in his chair, staring at Maya with a look of pure venom. Maya sat next to me. She was wearing a simple gray blazer. Her hands were folded on the table. She wasn't shaking. 10 years of walking on eggshells around this man had trained her for this moment. She was no longer walking on eggshells. She was walking on the ground, and she knew I was the foundation beneath her feet. Thorne cleared his throat. He opened a leather folder and spread out a series of documents. He didn't look at me. He looked only at Maya, treating her like a naughty child who had run away from home. Mrs. Sterling let us cut to the chase. Thorne said, his voice smooth and oily. My client is willing to overlook your recent erratic behavior. He is willing to drop the kidnapping charges regarding your son, provided you return the child to the family home immediately. Furthermore, we will be filing for divorce on the grounds of abandonment. We will be seeking full custody of the child, and we will be ensuring that you leave the marriage with exactly what you brought into it. Which, if I understand correctly, was nothing. Preston smirked. It was the smirk of a man who thought he held all the cards. He thought that because he was a Sterling, the law was just another employee he could bully. Maya didn't flinch. It didn't. She looked at Thorne, and then she looked at Preston. She didn't say a word. She just slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was the restraining order. I spoke for the first time. There is no kidnapping, Mr. Thorne, I said. My voice was low, but it carried across the room. There is only a mother protecting her child from a man who was arrested 2 nights ago for drunk driving and brandishing a firearm. A man who is currently under investigation for corporate embezzlement. The police report is attached. The judge signed the protection order this morning. If Preston comes within 500 feet of Maya or the boy, he goes back to that cell, and this time there will be no bail. Preston's face turned red. That is a lie, he spat. I was stressed. You stole my company. You stole my house. Thorne raised a hand to silence his client, but the damage was done. The shark looked at the police report. He saw the breathalyzer results. He saw the witness statements about the gun. His smooth smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Very well, Thorne said, adjusting his cuffs. We will fight the custody in court. But let us talk about assets. My client demands his share of the marital estate, the house in Grosse Pointe, the vacation home in Aspen, the fleet of vehicles, the art collection. These are assets acquired during the marriage. Under Michigan law, he is entitled to 50%. Preston leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with greed. I want her out of my house by tonight, he hissed, and I want the keys to my Porsche. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was lukewarm, but I drank it anyway. I needed the pause. I needed them to think I was considering their demands. You seem to be under a misunderstanding regarding the word ownership, Preston, I said. Preston slammed his hand on the table. Don't play word games with me, janitor. My name is on the deed. Actually, it isn't, I said. I opened my own folder. It was much thinner than Thorne's. It contained only 3 documents. I slid the first one across the mahogany. This is the deed to the Grosse Pointe estate, I said. You will notice that the owner listed is Sterling Logistics Holdings, LLC. The company purchased the home 10 years ago as a corporate retreat and executive housing perk. It belongs to the company. Preston blinked. That's just for tax purposes, he stammered. It's my house. It was your house when you were the CEO, I corrected him. But as of last Wednesday, you are no longer the CEO. You are an unemployed citizen who has been trespassing on company property. The board has voted to evict you. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. Thorne snatched the document. He scanned it rapidly, looking for a loophole. He found none. I had written that structure myself 2 decades ago to protect the company from liability. I never thought I would use it to evict the owner's son, but life is full of surprises. What about the cars? Preston shouted. The Porsche. The Range Rover. Leased, I said. By the company. The leases have been terminated effective immediately. The repo men are likely picking them up as we speak. Preston looked like he had been punched in the gut. He turned to his lawyer. Do something, he whispered. Thorne was flipping through his papers frantically. This is sharp practice, he muttered. But even if the tangible assets are tied up, there is still the liquid cash, the bank accounts, the investments. My client is entitled to spousal support. His wife has just come into a significant position of power within the company. He has become accustomed to a certain lifestyle. I couldn't help it. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who watches a wolf walk into a bear trap. You really didn't read what you signed, did you, Preston? I asked. Preston looked confused. What are you talking about? 10 years ago, I said. 3 days before your wedding, you were in your office. You were busy planning your bachelor party in Vegas. You were arrogant and you were in a rush. I came in with a stack of papers for you to sign. I watched the memory surface in his eyes. He remembered the day. He remembered the janitor bothering him with paperwork. He remembered signing blindly just to get me out of the room so he could call his mistress. You told me they were insurance forms, Preston said. I told you they were documents to protect your assets, I said. And they were. Just not in the way you thought. I slid the final document across the table. It was a prenuptial agreement. At the time you were terrified that Maya was a gold digger, I said. You were listening to your mother who told you that the poor girl from the wrong side of the tracks was only after the sterling fortune. So when I presented you with a prenup that seemed to block her from getting a dime, you signed it. You didn't even read the fine print. You just saw what you wanted to see. A way to keep your money. Thorne was reading the document now. His face went pale. He looked at Preston with something resembling pity. Clause 4B, I said, reciting it from memory. In the event of infidelity proven by digital or physical evidence, all claims to shared assets are forfeit. Clause 5C. In the event of domestic abuse or endangerment of a minor, all rights to spousal support are null and void. I pulled out a USB drive and placed it on top of the paper. This drive contains 3 years of hotel receipts, credit card statements for jewelry bought for women who are not your wife, and the video footage from the hallway where you struck your son. The room went silent. The air conditioning seemed to get louder. Preston Sterling sat in his chair, and for the first time in his life he looked small. He was a man who had defined himself by what he owned, his house, his car, his name, and in the span of 10 minutes he had learned that he owned nothing. He was not a millionaire. He was a man with 0 assets, no job, and a mountain of personal debt on his credit cards that the company would no longer pay. Thorne closed his leather folder. He didn't slam it. He closed it gently like a coroner zipping up a body bag. I think we are done here, Thorne said. He stood up. He didn't wait for his client. He walked to the door. Preston remained seated. He looked at Maya. He was waiting for her to break. He was waiting for her to say that this was too cruel, that she would give him something, anything. He was banking on the fact that she had always been the soft one. Maya stood up. She smoothed her blazer. She looked down at the man she had feared for a decade. The movers will be there at noon, Maya said. Her voice was steady. Pack your clothes, Preston. Only your clothes. Leave the watches. Leave the cufflinks. Those were gifts from the company account. She turned and walked out of the room. She didn't look back. I stayed for a moment longer. I gathered the papers. I picked up the USB drive. Preston looked up at me. His eyes were wet. How could you? He whispered. I grew up with you. You drove me to school. You were like a father to me. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had thrown a bottle at his own child. I looked at the man who had laughed while his mother destroyed people's lives. I was never your father, Preston, I said. I was the help, and you should have tipped better. I walked out of the conference room and left him alone in the cold. The legal trap had snapped shut. The physical threat was neutralized. The financial lifeline was cut. Preston Sterling was free to go, but he had nowhere to go to. He was a ghost in a city of concrete. But the war wasn't over. We had cut off the head of the snake, but the venom was still in the system. There was one more loose end. One more person who had been silent for too long. My daughter. It was time for her to heal, and healing sometimes requires a different kind of justice. It was time to go home. The courtroom is a theater where the script is usually written by the person with the most expensive suit. On Monday morning, Department 4 of the civil courthouse smelled of floor wax and desperate plea bargains. We were not there for a plea bargain. We were there for a dissection. Preston Sterling sat on the left side of the aisle. He had shaved and put on a navy blue suit that probably cost more than the bailiff's car. He was trying to look like a captain of industry. He was trying to look like the genius innovator who had built Sterling Logistics into a tech empire. But I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. He kept tapping his pen against the table, a nervous staccato rhythm that betrayed his fear. Maya sat on the right. She wore the same gray blazer she had worn during the confrontation in the boardroom. She didn't look like a captain of industry. She looked like a librarian or a school teacher. She sat with her hands folded on her lap, her spine straight, her eyes focused. She was no longer the trembling woman who had called me in the middle of the night. She was something else entirely. She was the calm in the center of the storm. Preston's lawyer, Marcus Thorne, stood up to make his opening statement. He walked back and forth in front of the judge, his voice booming with theatrical outrage. "Your Honor," he began, pointing a finger at Maya, "we are looking at a classic case of vindictive appropriation. This woman is a housewife. Her contribution to Sterling Logistics was hosting dinner parties and raising a child. Now she claims ownership of complex proprietary technology. It is absurd. My client, Preston Sterling, is the visionary. He is the architect of the routing algorithm that tripled the company's efficiency. To suggest that his wife, who has no degree in computer science, wrote the source code is not just a lie, it is an insult to the court's intelligence." Preston nodded vigorously. He looked at the judge with a practiced expression of wounded genius. He believed his own lie. He had told the story so many times at cocktail parties and board meetings that he had actually convinced himself he was the one who spent the long nights coding. The judge, a tired-looking woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, turned to us. She looked at Maya. "Does the respondent have a counter-argument?" she asked. I started to stand up, but Maya put a hand on my arm. Her grip was firm. She didn't look at me. She looked at the judge. "I do, Your Honor," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear. It cut through the stale air of the courtroom like a bell. Maya stood up. She didn't walk around. She didn't wave her arms. She simply picked up a laptop from her bag and placed it on the table. "Mr. Thorne is correct about one thing," Maya said. "I do not have a degree in computer science. I dropped out of MIT in my junior year to support Preston while he finished his MBA. I waited tables during the day and I wrote code at night while he was out networking." She opened the laptop. The screen glowed, illuminating her face. "Preston says he is the architect," she continued. "So perhaps he can answer a simple question about the architecture." She turned to Preston. He stopped tapping his pen. He looked at his lawyer, then back at her. "Preston," she said gently, "can you explain to the court what happens in the routing algorithm when the deadlock protocol is triggered by a race condition on the server?" The room went silent. It was a technical question, a specific question. It was the kind of question that only the person who built the engine would know how to answer. Preston blinked. He adjusted his tie. Well, obviously he stammered. "The system, it reboots, it optimizes. It is a cloud-based solution for latency." He was throwing out buzzwords. He was speaking the language of a sales brochure, not an engineer. Maya shook her head slightly. "No," she said. "That is not what happens. If the deadlock protocol triggers, the system doesn't reboot. It reroutes the query through a secondary cache to prevent data loss. It is a fail-safe I wrote in 2014. She turned the laptop toward the judge. "Your Honor," she said, "this is the version history of the source code. It is stored on a private repository that my husband doesn't even know exists because he has never logged into the back-end server in his life." The judge leaned forward, peering at the screen. Maya scrolled through the timeline. "Here is the initial commit, dated November 12th, 2012, she said. Time stamped at 3 a.m. The user ID is M. Sterling." She scrolled down. "Here is the major update that allowed for real-time tracking," she continued. Dated July 4th, 2015. "While Preston was on a yacht in Miami celebrating the company's success, I was at home with a sick baby, rewriting the database structure because the load was crashing the servers." Preston stood up, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "This is a fabrication," he shouted. "She hacked the system. She changed the names." "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," the judge snapped. Maya didn't flinch. She typed a command into the terminal. "If I hacked the system," Maya said, "then I wouldn't know the digital watermark hidden in the core kernel." She hit enter. On the large screen at the front of the courtroom, a string of code appeared. It wasn't random numbers. It was a comment buried deep within the millions of lines of code. It was a message that had been sitting there for a decade, invisible to everyone but the creator. The text read, "To my son Leo. May you always find your way home. Written by Mom." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even Thorne looked down at his shoes. There was no arguing with that. It was a love letter written in C++. It was a mother's fingerprint on the very soul of the company. Preston slumped back into his chair. The air seemed to go out of him. The illusion was gone. The genius innovator was just a man in a suit who had taken credit for his wife's brilliance for 10 years. He had bullied her, he had belittled her, and he had convinced the world she was nothing. But the code didn't lie. The code remembered who wrote it. The judge took off her glasses. She looked at Preston with a mixture of pity and disgust. "The evidence is conclusive," the judge said. "The intellectual property known as the Sterling routing system belongs to Mrs. Maya Sterling. As this asset constitutes the primary value of the company, the court recognizes her as the majority stakeholder and rightful owner of the technology." She banged the gavel. It sounded like a gunshot ending a long and painful war. We walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. Preston remained inside, arguing with his lawyer, gesturing wildly at empty air. He was a man of the past now, a relic. Maya took a deep breath. She looked at the city skyline. She looked different. The weight that had been pressing down on her shoulders for a decade was gone. She stood taller. "You knew, didn't you?" she asked me. "You knew I wrote it." I lit a cigarette and took a long drag. "I knew, Preston," I said. "I knew he couldn't program a microwave, let alone a logistics network. I just needed you to remember that you were the one holding the keys." She looked at me, her eyes clear and sharp. "What happens now, Eli?" "Now," I said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "Now you go to that office, you walk into that boardroom, and you sit at the head of the table, not as Preston's wife, not as a placeholder. You sit there as the CEO." "But I've never run a company," she said, a hint of the old doubt creeping back in. "You've been running it for years, Maya," I said. "You just let him sit in the chair. You built the engine. You know how to drive the car. I will handle the unions. I will handle the logistics. I will keep the wolves away from the door. But you are the vision." She nodded slowly. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She didn't call her mother. She didn't call a friend. She opened her email and drafted a memo to the board of directors. Subject: leadership transition. I watched her type. She was fast. She was efficient. She was lethal. The king is dead, I thought to myself. Long live the queen. Preston Sterling thought he was a giant because he stood on the shoulders of a woman he didn't respect. He never realized that if she stepped away, he wouldn't just fall. He would disappear. I opened the door of the car for her. "Where to, Mrs. Sterling?" I asked. She looked at me, and for the first time she smiled a real smile. A smile of power. "To the office, Eli," she said. "We have work to do." I drove her toward the glass tower that overlooked the city. The legal battle was won. The social battle was won. But the real work was just beginning. We had retaken the kingdom, but now we had to rebuild it from the ashes of Preston's incompetence. And as I looked at Maya in the rearview mirror, checking the stock prices on her phone, I knew one thing for certain. The Sterling family was finally in good hands. The visiting room at the county detention center does not smell like justice. It smells of industrial floor cleaner, stale sweat, and the metallic tang of fear. It is a place where time slows down to a crawl and where the silence is heavy enough to crush a man's soul. I stood in the corner of the room, leaning against the cinder block wall. I was not there to visit, not yet. I was there to observe. I wanted to see the final act of the tragedy play out before I delivered the epilogue. Preston Sterling sat on a metal stool bolted to the floor. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big for him. The fabric bunched around his waist and hung loose on his shoulders, making him look like a child playing dress-up. Gone were the Italian suits. Gone was the Rolex. Gone was the arrogance that had been his armor for 35 years. His hair was unwashed, and he had the beginnings of a patchy beard. He looked at his hands, picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. He was waiting. The heavy steel door on the visitor's side buzzed and opened. Victoria Sterling walked in. Even in a jailhouse, Victoria tried to command the room. She was wearing a black trench coat and dark sunglasses, as if she were a celebrity avoiding the paparazzi. She walked with her chin held high, but I could see the cracks in the porcelain. Her steps were a little too fast. Her grip on her purse was a little too tight. She didn't look at the other families huddling by the phones. She looked at the glass partition as if it were a mirror reflecting a reality she refused to accept. She sat down opposite her son. She picked up the black receiver. Preston picked up his. I expected tears. I expected a mother's embrace even through the glass. I expected her to ask him if he was eating, if he was okay, if he was scared. I was wrong. "You look hideous," Victoria said. Her voice was tinny and sharp, leaking out from the earpiece. Preston blinked. He looked at his mother with hollow eyes. "Mom," he whispered, "I need a lawyer. Thorne quit. They are talking about 5 years." Victoria scoffed. She adjusted her sunglasses, but she didn't take them off. She couldn't bear to look him in the eye. 5 years, she repeated. "Do you know how long I have spent building the Sterling name? 40 years, Preston. 40 years of galas and committees and board meetings, and you destroyed it in 48 hours. Preston leaned forward. The chain of his handcuffs rattled against the counter. "Mom, please, I need help. I don't know what to do." "Help," Victoria hissed. "You want my help? You ungrateful child. I am the one who needs help. Do you know what happened yesterday? The country club revoked my membership. They sent me a letter, Preston. A letter. They said my presence was causing a disturbance. And the neighbors, the way they look at me when I check the mail, it is humiliating." Preston stared at her. He seemed to be having trouble processing her words. He was talking about survival. She was talking about a country club membership. "I lost everything," Mom, Preston said. "Maya took the company. She took the house." "And whose fault is that?" Victoria snapped. "I told you to control her. I told you to show her who was boss. But you were weak. You were always weak, just like your father. You let a nobody walk all over us. And now, because of your incompetence, I have to sell the summer house just to pay the legal retainers for myself." Preston sat back. A strange expression crossed his face. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. It was the look of a man waking up from a long fever dream. "You told me to do it," he said quietly. "What did you say?" Victoria asked. "You told me to fire Eli," Preston said, his voice rising. "You told me the prenup was ironclad. You told me Maya was just a gold digger. You told me that a Sterling never apologizes." "I was trying to teach you to be a man," Victoria shouted. Her voice echoed in the small booth, drawing the attention of the guards. No, Preston shouted back. "You were trying to make me into you." He stood up. The stool screeched against the floor. "Every mistake I made," Preston said, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. "Every person I hurt. I did it because I wanted you to be proud of me. I treated Maya like trash because you hated her. I treated Eli like a servant because you told me he was beneath us. I became a monster because I was raised by one." Victoria stood up. She looked appalled. "How dare you," she said. "After everything I sacrificed." "Get out," Preston screamed. He slammed the receiver against the glass. "Get out of here. I don't want to see you. I never want to see you again. Go save your reputation. Go save your club membership. Leave me alone." The guards stepped forward, their hands on their batons. Victoria recoiled. She looked at her son. Then she looked around the room, realizing that for the first time she was the spectacle. She was the embarrassment. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't say "I love you." She simply hung up the phone, smoothed her coat, and walked out the door. She walked out of his life just as easily as she had walked into the room, leaving her son alone in the wreckage she had engineered. Preston stood there panting. His chest heaved up and down. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass. He closed his eyes. I waited a moment. I let the silence settle. Then I walked over and sat down in the chair Victoria had just vacated. I picked up the phone. Preston looked up. When he saw me, his face crumbled. The anger evaporated, leaving only the scared boy I had known 30 years ago. He sat down slowly. He picked up the receiver. His hands were shaking so badly, he almost dropped it. "Eli," he whispered. His voice was broken. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. I looked at the boy I had driven to soccer practice, the boy I had taught to tie a tie, the boy who had grown up to spit in my face. "Eli." "I am so sorry," he said. Tears began to stream down his face, cutting tracks through the grime on his cheeks. She was right. I was weak. I didn't know. I was blind. He leaned in close to the glass, desperation in his eyes. "Help me, Eli. Please. I know I messed up. I know I was terrible. But you are the only family I have left. Talk to Maya. She listens to you. Tell her to drop the charges. Tell her I will sign anything. I just want to go home. I can't stay here. They will kill me in here." I listened to him beg. I listened to him use every card in the deck. He played the nostalgia card. He played the pity card. He even tried to call me Uncle Eli, a name he hadn't used since he was 12. I waited until he ran out of breath. I waited until the only sound was his jagged breathing. Then I spoke. Preston. I said, my voice calm and even. Do you remember the time you crashed your father's car when you were 16? Preston blinked, confused by the question. Yes, he said. You fixed it. You told Dad it was a deer. You saved me. I did, I said. And do you remember when you were caught cheating on your college entrance exams? You paid off the proctor. Preston said, nodding eagerly, hope lighting up his eyes. You always fixed it, Eli. That's what you do. You fix things. Fix this for me, please. I leaned forward. I fixed your mistakes because your father asked me to, I said. I cleaned up your messes because I was paid to protect the company and the family. I forgave your arrogance because I thought you were just a child who would eventually grow up. I paused. But you didn't grow up, Preston. You just got bigger, and your mistakes got louder. I can change, Preston sobbed. I swear I can change. I believe you can change, I said. But you won't do it in a penthouse. You will do it in a cell. The hope in his eyes died. Preston, I said, in business, I can forgive a lot of things. I can forgive a bad deal. I can forgive an insult. I can even forgive theft if the person is desperate enough. Business is a game, and sometimes you lose. My voice dropped an octave. It became the voice of the man who had buried bodies in the desert of his memory. But there is one thing I never forgive. I never forgive a man who hurts my daughter. Preston flinched as if I had hit him. You raised a hand to Maya, I said. You terrorized her in her own home. You threatened to take her child. That is not business, Preston. That is war. And in war there are no second chances. But 5 years, Preston whispered. That's a lifetime. It is 5 years, I said. It is time for you to learn what the rest of us have always known. Actions have consequences. There is no one to pay off the proctor this time. There is no one to fix the fender. The bill has come due and you are going to pay it. I stood up. Eli, wait, Preston cried. Don't leave me here, please. I have no one. I looked down at him through the glass. You have yourself. Preston, I said, for the first time in your life, you are completely on your own. My advice is to get comfortable with the man in the mirror. You are going to be spending a lot of time together. I hung up the phone. I didn't look back as I walked to the door. I could hear him screaming my name. I could hear him banging on the glass. But the sounds were muffled, fading away like a bad radio signal. I walked out of the detention center and into the parking lot. The air outside was fresh and crisp. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. It was over. The toxic root had been pulled. Victoria was trapped in her social exile. Preston was trapped in his concrete box. And Maya was free. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean air. It is a strange thing to destroy a family you spent 30 years serving. But as I unlocked my car door, I realized something important. I hadn't destroyed the Sterling family. I had simply pruned the dead branches so the healthy ones could finally grow. I got into my car and turned the key. The engine roared to life. I had a dinner date with my daughter and my grandson. We were going to have pizza. We were going to laugh. And for the first time in a decade, we were going to be safe. I drove away, leaving the jailhouse behind in the rearview mirror. Some lessons are learned in school, some are learned in church, and some, unfortunately, are learned too late. The decay of a dynasty does not always sound like an explosion. Sometimes it sounds like the soft click of a latch on a designer handbag being opened for the last time. It sounds like the beep of a credit card terminal declining a transaction. It sounds like the silence of a phone that has forgotten how to ring. For Victoria Sterling, the fall was not a sudden drop off a cliff. It was a slow, agonizing slide down a mountain of razor blades. It had been 3 months since the court verdict. 3 months since Preston was locked away and Maya took the helm of the company. In that time, the ecosystem of Detroit high society had cleansed itself of the Sterling toxin. Without the monthly stipend from the company, Victoria discovered a terrifying mathematical reality. Her lifestyle cost $50,000 a month. Her remaining savings generated less than $2,000. I watched from a distance as the liquidation began. It started with the staff. The gardener was the first to go, then the housekeeper, then the private chef. The mansion in Grosse Pointe, which she did not own but was allowed to stay in until the end of the month, became a tomb. Dust began to settle on the marble floors she used to scream at people for walking on. Then came the assets she actually owned, the jewelry, the furs, and finally the collection. It was a Tuesday morning when she walked into a high-end consignment shop in Birmingham. I knew the shop. It was the kind of place where wealthy women sold their mistakes to other wealthy women who wanted a bargain. Victoria was wearing large sunglasses and a scarf over her head like a celebrity in hiding. She was carrying 2 large shopping bags. Inside those bags were 6 Hermes Birkin bags. Orange, black, crocodile skin, ostrich leather. These were not just accessories to her. They were her identity. They were the armor she wore to intimidate the wives of senators and bankers. She had once told me that a woman without a Birkin was invisible. She placed them on the counter. The clerk, a young woman with pierced ears and a bored expression, didn't recognize her. That was the first cut. "To be anonymous in a store where you used to be a queen. I would like to consign these," Victoria said, her voice trembling slightly. The clerk put on white gloves and inspected the bags. She looked for scratches. She looked for stains. She treated the sacred objects like used luggage. "I can give you 12,000 for the lot," the clerk said. Victoria gasped. 12,000. The crocodile one alone cost 40. "The market is flooded," the clerk said, shrugging. "Do you want the check or not?" Victoria looked at the bags. She looked at the door. She knew the rent was due on the small apartment she had moved into on the outskirts of the city. She knew the electricity bill was sitting on her counter in a red envelope. "I will take the check," she whispered. She signed the paper. She took the money. And as she walked out of the store, she looked lighter but also smaller. She had sold pieces of her soul to pay for another month of survival. I followed her to her new home. It was not a slum, but for a sterling, it might as well have been a prison. It was a 2-story garden apartment complex near the airport. The paint was peeling. The grass was overgrown. The sound of jet engines roaring overhead was constant, a reminder of all the places she could no longer go. She unlocked her door and went inside. I sat in my car and drank my coffee. I wasn't gloating. There is no joy in watching an old animal suffer. But there is a necessity in witnessing the end of a cycle. A week later, she reached out. She didn't call Maya. She didn't call Preston, who was currently navigating the politics of the cell block. She called me. She asked to meet at the Botanical Gardens on Belle Isle. It was a neutral ground, a place of public beauty that didn't require an entrance fee. I arrived 10 minutes early. I sat on a bench near the koi pond. The trees were bare, stripped by the winter wind. The water was gray and still. Victoria arrived right on time. She was wearing her best coat, but I noticed a button was missing. Her hair was pulled back, but the dye job was fading, revealing the gray roots she had fought against for decades. She walked with a limp in her pride. She sat down on the other end of the bench. She didn't look at me. She watched the fish swimming in the cold water. "Eli," she said. Her voice was soft, lacking its usual venom. "Victoria," I said. "It has been a hard winter," she said. "It is winter for everyone, Victoria," I replied. She turned to look at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She hadn't been sleeping. "I need help, Eli. I have nowhere else to go. The apartment lease is up next week." The landlord raised the rent. "He says I am a liability because I have no proof of income." I nodded. "That is standard practice," I said. "I am a sterling," she hissed, a flash of the old fire returning. "I shouldn't have to show proof of income. My name is the proof." "Your name is a liability now, Victoria," I said gently. "Your name means scandal. It means embezzlement. It means bad debt." She slumped. She knew I was right. "Preston is useless," she said. "Maya won't answer my calls. You are the only one left. You worked for us for 30 years. You ate at our table. You drove our cars. We were family." I looked at her. I remembered eating at their table, yes, but only in the kitchen with the other staff. I remembered driving their cars, but only to wash them or pick up their dry cleaning. I remembered being family only when it was convenient for them to use me. "We were never family, Victoria," I said. "I was an employee. And you were an employer who forgot to pay into the pension fund of human decency." She reached out and touched my arm. Her hand was cold. "Please, Eli. I know you have savings. I know you have influence with Maya. Just a small loan. Enough to get me into a better place. Enough to start over. I can consult. I know people. I can be an etiquette coach." I looked at her hand on my sleeve. It was the hand of a woman who had never done a day of hard labor in her life. I reached into my pocket. I didn't pull out a checkbook. I didn't pull out a wad of cash. I pulled out a small white business card. I placed it in her hand. She looked at it. She squinted, reading the text. "Detroit Labor Solutions, temporary and permanent staffing." She looked up at me, confusion clouding her face. "What is this?" she asked. "It is a job, Victoria," I said. "I know the owner. He is a good man. He supplies cleaning crews for the industrial parks and office buildings downtown. It is minimum wage, but it is honest money." Her face went pale. She dropped the card as if it were burning her skin. "You want me to clean," she whispered. "You want me to be a janitor, like you." I stood up. I buttoned my coat against the wind. "There is no shame in honest work, Victoria," I said. "You spent your whole life looking down on people who clean up your messes. You thought you were better than the maid who scrubbed your toilet and the driver who parked your car. You thought labor was a punishment." I looked down at her. She looked small and broken on the park bench. "Labor is not a punishment," I said. "It is a privilege. It is how you earn your place in the world. It is how you sleep at night, knowing you owe nothing to anyone." I pointed at the card on the ground. "Pick it up, Victoria. Or don't. The choice is yours. But that is the only help you will get from me." I turned and walked away. "Eli," she screamed, "you can't leave me here. I am Victoria Sterling." I kept walking. The wind carried her voice away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what she would do. She would sit there for an hour crying over her lost empire. She would curse my name. She would curse the world. But eventually, when the cold seeped into her bones and the reality of her hunger outweighed her pride, she would reach down. She would pick up that white card. She would wipe the dirt off it, and she would make the call, not because she wanted to change, but because she had no other choice. I walked to my car. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Maya. "Meeting went well. Board approved the new expansion plan. Leo got an A on his science project. Dinner Sunday." I smiled. I typed back, "I will be there. Save me a slice of cake." I drove out of the park. The rearview mirror was empty. The past was behind me. The mess had been cleaned up. And for the first time in a long time, the road ahead was clear. The story of the Sterling family was over. The story of my family was just beginning. Spring in Detroit is usually gray and wet, but today the sky was a piercing shade of blue. It was the kind of blue that looked painted on like a backdrop in a movie where nothing bad is allowed to happen. I sat on the wooden bleachers of the community park. The wood was warm against my back. The smell of freshly cut grass and hot dogs filled the air. It was a Saturday, 1 year, 365 days. That is how long it had been since the gavel came down. That is how long it had been since the Sterling Empire crumbled and was rebuilt from the ground up. I watched the batter's box. A small boy in a red helmet was tapping his cleats against the dirt. He looked nervous. He gripped the bat a little too tight, his knuckles turning white. "Keep your eye on the ball, Leo," I shouted. "Just like we practiced. Don't swing until you see the threads." Leo looked at me. He nodded. He didn't look at the pitcher. He looked at me. He trusted me. Sitting next to me was a woman who looked like Maya Sterling but felt like a stranger. The Maya I had known for 10 years was a shadow, always flinching, always apologizing for taking up space. This woman was solid. She was wearing jeans and a simple white t-shirt, but she wore them with the confidence of a queen. She was checking her phone, but not frantically. She was smiling. "Quarterly projections are up 15%, she said without looking up. "The board wants to expand into renewable logistics. They want me to lead the summit in Chicago next month." I took a sip of my iced tea. "You should go," I said. "You earned it." "I'm thinking about it," she said, "but Leo has playoffs that week. I might send the VP." "Being a CEO is important, Eli, but being a mom is non-negotiable." I smiled. That was the difference. Preston thought power meant being everywhere at once, controlling everything. Maya understood that real power was the ability to choose what matters. The pitcher wound up and threw the ball. It was a fast one. Leo swung. The sound was perfect. It was a sharp metallic ping that echoed across the field. The ball soared over the shortstop's head and landed in the outfield grass. "Run!" I shouted. "Run home, Leo!" He took off his helmet, bouncing as he sprinted around the bases. Maya jumped to her feet, cheering. Her laugh was loud and uninhibited. It was a sound I hadn't heard in a decade. As I watched them celebrate, I let my mind drift back to the ghosts. People still talked about it. In the barbershops, in the boardrooms, they whispered about the fall of the House of Sterling. They talked about how Preston Sterling, the golden boy, had been caught in a net of his own making. He was currently serving year 1 of 5 at a minimum security facility upstate. I heard he was working in the library. Maybe he was finally learning to read the fine print. And Victoria. The last I heard, she was still working for the cleaning service. She had been assigned to the night shift at the very office building she used to own. There was a poetic justice in that. Every time she polished the brass plaque in the lobby, she had to look at her own reflection and see what she had become. She had stopped calling me. She had stopped calling Maya. She had finally learned the lesson that silence is sometimes the only dignity left. But the city didn't just talk about them. They talked about the man in the shadows. They talked about the grandfather who dismantled a dynasty with a few phone files and a lot of patience. I became a sort of urban legend. I was no longer just Eli the driver. I was the guy you didn't cross. I was the guy you called when the law failed you. I had received offers, job offers, security consulting gigs. People wanted to pay me a lot of money to be their fixer. I turned them all down. I was retired. My job description had changed. I looked toward the parking lot. About 50 yards away, a black SUV was parked under an oak tree. The engine was idling. The windows were tinted, but I knew who was inside. It was Silas and his team. For the last year, I had kept them on the payroll. I paid them out of my own pocket to watch the house, to follow Leo to school, to make sure that no creditor or old friend of Preston's got any bright ideas. I was paranoid. You don't spend 30 years in the trenches without expecting a counterattack. But as I watched Leo slide into home plate safe and happy, I realized something. The war was over. The enemy wasn't regrouping. They were defeated. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. It was the same old battered phone I had used to record Preston. It was the weapon that had fired the kill shot. I dialed Silas. I saw the brake lights of the SUV flash as he answered. "Boss," Silas said. His voice was gravel and loyalty. "We have eyes on the perimeter. All clear." I watched Maya hug her son. She was wiping dirt off his uniform, kissing his forehead. She looked safe. She looked free. "Silas," I said, "stand down." There was a pause on the line. "Stand down, boss. You mean for the day?" "No," I said. "I mean for good. The contract is done. Send the boys home." "Are you sure?" Eli Silas asked. I looked at my family. I looked at the peace that surrounded them like a force field. "I am sure," I said. "They are safe now." "Copy that," Silas said. "It has been an honor, Eli." "Likewise, Silas." I hung up the phone. I watched the black SUV pull away. It turned the corner and disappeared into traffic. I sat there on the bleachers feeling a strange lightness in my chest. For the first time in my life, I wasn't guarding anything. I wasn't planning. I wasn't calculating leverage. I was just a grandfather at a baseball game. Leo ran over to the fence. "Grandpa, did you see that?" he yelled. "I got a double." "I saw it, kid," I said, standing up. "You have a good swing, better than your father ever had." I walked down to the field. Maya was packing up the equipment bag. She looked at me and she stopped. She studied my face. She knew me better than anyone. "You called Silas, didn't you?" she asked. I nodded. "Is everything okay?" she asked. A flicker of the old worry in her eyes. "Everything is perfect," I said. "We don't need guards anymore, Maya. You are the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. You survived a divorce, a scandal, and a hostile takeover. You don't need me to protect you. You can protect yourself." She smiled. She reached out and took my hand. "I will always need you, Dad," she said. It was the first time she had called me that in public. Not Eli, not the driver. Dad. It hit me harder than a bullet. "Come on," she said, throwing the bag over her shoulder. "Let's go get burgers. Leo is starving, and I think you owe me a milkshake." I followed them to the car. Not the black town car I used to drive. A sensible blue minivan. Maya drove. I sat in the passenger seat. Leo sat in the back, singing along to the radio. As we drove through the streets of Detroit, I looked out the window. The city looked different. It wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was just a city, a place where people lived and worked and tried to do their best. I was done with secrets. I was done with schemes. But as we stopped at a red light, I saw a man in a fancy suit yelling at a valet parker on the sidewalk. He was red in the face, poking the young kid in the chest, looking around to see if anyone was watching his display of power. I watched him. My hand instinctively twitched toward my phone. Old habits die hard. But then the light turned green. Maya accelerated. We left the angry man behind. Let someone else teach him the lesson, I thought. "I have a milkshake to drink. My name is Eli Bennett. I am 70 years old. I used to be a ghost. Now I am a man. And if you ask me which life is better, I will tell you this. The view from the head of the table is nice, but the view from the bleachers watching your grandson run home is the only thing worth fighting for. The story ends here. Not with a bang, not with a scream, but with the laughter of a child in the back seat of a minivan. And that, my friends, is the only victory that lasts. Moral lesson. There is a quiet power and dignity that noise can never replicate. Preston and his mother believed that wealth gave them the right to be cruel and that status was a shield for abuse. They mistook my silence for weakness and my kindness for stupidity. But a real father doesn't need to shout to be heard, he just needs to be prepared. I taught them that true leverage isn't money, it is integrity. When you build your life on the suffering of others, all it takes is one phone call from a righteous man to bring your whole house of cards crashing down. Thank you for listening to my story. If you believe that justice is best served cold and that family is worth fighting for, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to stand up to a bully to protect someone you love? I read every single one. Until next time, stay strong and watch your six.